All right, so we're live. So again, welcome. Before I pass things over to Tom, I'm just hoping to give you all a quick overview of what we're gonna chat about today. And then again, like I said, I'll pass things over to Tom to start the update process. So we're gonna start with an update of the 2021 implementation for projects that we received during the last session. So we'll give you a quick overview of where we're at with all of those. We're gonna have a quick conversation on the legislative concepts for our two placeholders. So the transfers of stored water and the department fee supported programs. We're mainly gonna be talking about the relating to clause and just kind of giving a quick reminder of where we're at and what we're doing with those legislative concepts. We're going to spend about an hour on split season leasing. So we're going to have a quick program overview from some department staff, just to make sure folks understand what the program is and what it does. Then we'll review the draft LC language, and then we'll get into a more in-depth conversation on policies that have been proposed by other folks and kind of discuss those with you all. Then we'll do a quick discussion on other LCs, including water planning, potential enforcement, suggestions that folks have, and then other proposals that we've received in our feedback gathering. And then this one is going to be time dependent, since we're mostly focusing on legislative concepts today, but I do want to flag that we'll go through the policy option package table pretty quickly and just give folks an opportunity to provide feedback verbally if you've not been able to provide feedback written. So that will, the 30 minutes that we've allotted on the agenda will kind of depend on how quickly we move through everything else. And then obviously we'll have time at the very end for questions and comments and other items that folks want to get to. So with that, I will go ahead and pass things over to Tom. Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Bren, and thanks everyone for being here today. It's great to see a good turnout, and we've got a pretty full agenda, and so we'll try to move through this with as effectively and efficiently as we can. My piece here is to talk about the implementation of our budget and project issues by virtue of the investments made by the legislature during the long session in 2021. As well as the second special session in December of 2021. And what I want to talk with you about is just a bit of a reminder that this is a big investment, really unprecedented, at least in modern times, in terms of an investment in our agency, and we have a lot of work to do. And so being able to have opportunities like this to communicate what we're doing and to help you understand what we're juggling and some of the successes and challenges that we have in making progress is really important. I think I've mentioned this before in front of this group, but I want to mention it again. In addition to this forum, we provide briefings to our commission. There was a commission meeting last week, some of you may have listened to, where we talk about the workload that we have and the progress that we're making. We also have I meet monthly with a group of folks representing agricultural and municipal local government interests. I also meet with a group of conservation interests. And I just want to extend to any of you who are interested in maybe doing a deeper dive around these issues that I am happy to talk with you about the projects in more specificity than I'll go into today. And if you're interested, just shoot me an email, thomas.m.byler, B-Y-L-E-R, at water.oregon.gov. And either I or my assistant Nirvana will get back to you and we'll set up some time for us to chat. So I just would welcome that, because really the bottom line is we have so much work in front of us, and many of you know this already, that it's going to be difficult for us to carry all this out, and we're not going to be able to carry it all out in one biennium. Some of it is not intended to be carried out in one biennium, but nevertheless, there's just a lot of work that we've got in play. And to the extent that we can help you understand what's going on and and how some of that workload might inform some of our conversations around option packages going forward. Should there be an interest to extend some of the limitation or authority associated with those projects into the next biennium, we want to make sure that we're having those conversations now and in the next couple months, so that we can tee that up as part of our agency request budget. So another element that I wanted to apprise you of is, first of all, I just really appreciate the feedback and the questions that I've had from people to date. We are entering a little bit of kind of new terrain for ourselves in terms of trying to work on such a pretty massive workload, and to do so in an organized fashion, but maybe even just as importantly, to help our commission and the general public understand what progress we're making. What we've been working with, and I think many of you have seen, is a big, long Excel spreadsheet that in its initial form that we've shared with you is pretty hard to sort through. I think it's 15, 16 pages long. It's got over 70 projects identified in it, some of which, many of which are a part of the 2021 investment, but some of which are not, but we think are important to highlight just so you know our full breadth of workload. But that list was pretty clunky to work with. And so we've been getting a lot of good feedback from you all in terms of having better communication tools, and we're working toward that end. We're working ultimately towards some kind of dashboard approach. A couple of weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, Raquel and I met with some staff from SAFE Corporation who have been practicing dashboarding as a way to provide kind of at a glance progress reports on their work. And it was pretty enlightening conversation. It certainly made me realize that it's both an art and a science in terms of putting one of those together, that it takes time to practice it, to make it useful for the audiences. But that it's also a very useful thing to put into play. And so that's what we're moving toward. The spreadsheet that you've seen in the past, we're starting to make we're kind of migrating towards what we hope will be more of a dashboard information for folks. But right now, what we have is an improved spreadsheet. I think Raquel might try to drop it in the chat for you. We talked with the commission about it last week. And it's on our website, both in our project update page, as well as you could find it in the staff report associated with this item for the commission meeting in March. The improvements that we're looking at for that spreadsheet are pretty simple, but they are helpful for me at least, and I expect they would be for you too, in terms of organizing around categories and types, so that you can look at that list and see, looking for an item, you can look at dam safety or water rights or field or administration. So it'll give you a kind of some groupings where you'll be able to, I think, more readily find a project that you're interested in getting an update on. We're also working at refining the amount of data and information that we provide. I think that there's a lot more data that we would need for our own purposes internally that might not be as useful for external audiences. And so we're trying to streamline as we go forward. What I think we'll end up having, my hope is that a slimmed down version of the spreadsheet. Maybe not all of the projects that we have in our current spreadsheet. We might funnel that down a little bit, and then really speaking towards the at a glance aspect that I think we're aspiring toward, to give you a sense of, is this project moving? Is it on schedule? Is it behind schedule, et cetera? That will have some really easy markers on that spreadsheet, that will give you, the reader, a quick sense of whether a project is moving, whether it's got some problems, whether it's behind schedule, et cetera. So I wanted to update everyone around that, because that's something we've been working on and will continue to work on over time. But we are making some progress toward that end. Just in terms of the workload itself, I want to emphasize once again that the recruitment work that we have is priority number one. And it started during the fall and it continues. We do monthly reports, and we had by, I think, the end of January, we had, and I don't have the February report yet, I'm sorry, but at the end of January, we had filled, I think, 36 vacant positions over the course of the biennium, which is pretty extraordinary for us to do in that short of a period of time. But we still have a long way to go in terms of filling positions. And just in the special session in December, we received, I think, 29 more positions. So it's we're taking a step forward, but we still have a lot to do. I would also point out that a fair number of the positions that we're filling are internal with internal staff. And so it's great for us. It means we are putting people into positions that where we've got some folks who have experience, they know the agency, they know the issues. That's a good thing. But then, of course, it creates a new opening, a new vacancy for us. And so there's that side effect. The other thing I'd mention, and I think everyone knows this, but we're experiencing it firsthand, is it's a tough labor market right now, and in a pretty dynamic labor market in terms of our whole workplace structure is in flux as we're hopefully moving out of pandemic mode and into what would be perhaps a new normal in terms of what the workplace looks like. The state is trying to, and the department is trying to be competitive, knowing that knowing what government wages are, we are looking at trying to create a workplace that is attractive to strong candidates and employees, potential employees. And so we're doing the best we can with that, but we're competing with a lot of other employers right now to try to recruit. I think we're making good progress, but I just want to emphasize that this is priority one, because without the capacity, we can't get the work done. And it is taking time to make happen, both in terms of the recruitment process, the tough labor market, and just the onboarding, getting people acclimated and up to speed as quickly as we can is a pretty massive workload in and of itself. I would mention, just as an aside, that we're also competing against other state agencies. The February session, as I understand it, was another rainmaking opportunity for the legislature to provide more positions for agencies, which is great, great for those agencies, but creates potentially more competition out there for what might be a limited labor force that we're looking at. So that's a work in progress. We'll continue to work through that. Now, in terms of more specific projects, I'm not going to walk through a lot. I'm just going to highlight a few. And if we have a few minutes, I'd be happy to take any questions from folks that have specific questions about our process or specific projects. But I wanted to mention one of the time-limited projects that we had this biennium was associated with our fee-based programs. And I think a lot of us kind of associate that with what our water rights related programs. And most of those are our water right related programs, but it's not exclusive to that. And but you may recall that we received some ARPA funding for us to be able to work on backlog reduction for pending applications, as well as to establish a work group to work through better revenue approaches to sustain the capacity that we need for staff to run these programs. And as a reminder on that, while our budget did really well in 2021, we actually lost ground in terms of our capacity within our water rights division, in part because of some of the flaws in our current formula for the combination of fee and general fund revenues. Some of that funding also, the ARPA dollars, I think can help us with our ending balances if we need it going into the end of this biennium. So there's a combination of funding. So the update here is that to date, we've been waiting and waiting and waiting to hear whether the ARPA dollars would qualify for those purposes. And we found out late last week that it does. So we're pretty excited about that, and we're going to start moving on getting that up and running. Just a heads up for everyone on that we'll be looking to fill a suite of temporary positions that will help us crank out some of the backlog workload. And we will be also looking to set up another work group sometime this year to engage folks who are interested in the conversation about more sustainable revenue support for those programs. This is probably an area with the ARPA dollars where we can extend into the next biennium, but we'll need to make sure that we note that as part of our agency request budget so that the limitation is carried forward into the next biennium. But that's also something we'll want to talk with you about and make sure that we have appropriate support for that action. Another area that I've talked with you about before that we are making progress on, and I'm excited about it, is our protest backlog. But I also want to update you because the ground is shifting under our feet in ways that we can't necessarily control. When we started the biennium, we had 125 protests pending in front of the department. And you may recall that in recent years, recent biennia, probably for the last 10 years or so, we've really struggled with being underfunded in being able to cover our legal expenses. And that has had an impact on our ability to be able to carry out contested cases where we need to have resources to pay the Office of Administrative Hearings. We need to have resources to pay DOJ for their extra time to prepare for those hearings. And as a result, there wasn't much happening in contested cases and moving protests forward beyond trying to negotiate settlements. So as a result, we had a backlog that had ballooned up to 125 at the beginning of this biennium. The legislature provided some resources for us, and we hired a couple of protest coordinator positions internally. DOJ has resources and have just recently hired a full-time attorney who's going to help us, and we referred 28 protests to the Office of Administrative Hearings, which is a huge increase over what we'd done in previous biennium, where we might have moved maybe 2 or 3 in the course of a biennium. So I doubt we'll move all of those over the course of the next year and a half or so, but it has been encouraging because our ability to be able to refer these to the Office of Administrative Hearings have kind of been a smelling salts moment, I think, for the parties. It's allowed us to open the door to more meaningful settlement negotiations, which is a high priority for us because I think it's the most cost-effective way for us to address these issues. And it has it compelled some protestants to withdraw their protests. So we've already been able to chip away a little bit at the backlog. All that said, since July 1st, we've had protests trickle in on various issues of different programs. And most recently, there were 113 protests associated with in-stream water right applications in the Douglas County area. So we're now at 250 protests instead of at 125. So despite the work that we're doing, the backlog has grown. So I want to put that on your radar screen just because this is a significant amount of work and will take some significant resources and time for us to chip through these, and may deserve some conversation about whether there's some more effective and efficient ways for us to move through these. My hope is that we can move through a lot more settlement negotiations more aggressively through those, because again, I think that's the most cost-effective and time-efficient ways for us to be able to move through those. I see Marianne. I don't know, Marianne, if you had a question.
Well, one bigger question, which is I've been kind of scrolling through while you're talking and tracking on this spreadsheet, and I know we don't have time today because we have a lot of ground to cover today. And I'm very happy to have it be another group meeting. Is there a possibility to schedule a meeting with some more time for questions on project implementation with some folks from the department? Is one question. And then the second one, because I'll throw it up for group consideration. I think part of the reason that we have the doubling, the Department of Fish and Wildlife has taken to, instead of filing, one in-stream application per waterway, they file a number of them for, I think, each different life stage of fish per waterway. And I suspect that that the ag and environmental groups might have some common ground in trying to consolidate those into a workable number of applications. And I would imagine there's some efficiencies for the department there too. And so I don't know if that needs to be a legislative conversation concept, or it could just be conversations with the department. But I think it would be a very worthwhile conversation if the department is, I would like to see in-stream water rights halted until we have a better sense of where place-based planning is going and how that in-stream needs can be incorporated into the overall plans for a region. I think that would also reduce the number of new protests. But if ODF&W is not willing to do that and is going to kind of continue to move through on their prioritization versus a place where a community is able to do some local planning that might help figure out how the in-stream water right fits into an overall plan in a community, I would at least think there'd be a lot of value to a lot of money-saving processes to consolidate those into a workable number of applications. Especially because in a lot of the protests, the problems persist throughout all of them. And so instead of filing, 5 protests, somebody's filing 125 protests. So I just wanted to flag that as something to think about, and a place where I don't know, ag and environmental groups might have some common ground, because I know there's often protests coming from both sides on those.
Certainly, we've had some conversations internally. So thank you for that, for the observations and question. And we've been putting a lot of thought into the existing protest caseload that we have, and many of you may know that I think the majority of the protests that we have pending are for in-stream water right applications. And so we've been looking at ways to try to gain some efficiencies. And if there's ways for us to consolidate applications, we will take advantage of that. The devil's in the details for that consideration. But I would just say at the outset, without having any depth of knowledge around this new load of protests that we have, we are very open to considering that. Let me ask Marianne, you had asked for another meeting to dive a little bit more deeply and spend more time diving deeply. Are you asking for that to be this group, or have the bigger group, or is this a smaller breakout group that you're thinking of?
Whatever. I mean, like, for example, the kinds of questions I have, just so you can kind of get a scope on it, is, on the basin water budgets and groundwater recharge, you have USGS developed a first draft, OWRD reviewed and provide comments. USGS is working on incorporating comments into a second and final draft. Like, the question I would ask there is there going to be an opportunity for stakeholder review of that draft? If not, when will that draft be published? Like, those kinds of questions. So it's certainly not private, and I'm very happy to have it be a group meeting, especially if there's sensitivities to folks about, one group getting more or different meetings than other groups. But those are the kinds of questions I have, and I have like 6 or 7 of them, and I do not want to derail this meeting. I think I already have a little bit. So if we could find time for some of those kinds of questions, I'm happy to do it one-on-one. I'm happy to do it with this group, whatever works for you.
So we are open to whatever works for all of you. And if we can gain some efficiencies by having a larger group, maybe I would ask folks who are on here now with just a thumbs up, if you, just to get a general sense, if you would be interested in having an invitation go out for this kind of conversation, that we would extend to everyone on our list that for this meeting. It would be in addition to the meetings that we have already scheduled, and it would be focused on the project list, which I think actually would benefit us in terms of, because there are going to be a number of these projects that are going to be, I think, fodder for conversation around the ARB but 2023. So I'm seeing a good smattering of thumbs up. And so I think what we'll do is look to set up a time, maybe a couple hours to go through this. And we'll try to step through that as efficiently as we can. Mark?
Sorry, pressed the wrong button there, Director. Operator error.
Oh, no. Now you have to say something because I saw your hand up. It's okay. No problem, Mark. Okay, so we will do that. And maybe in the interest of time, unless there is any more questions, maybe we can just leave and shift gears, knowing that we'll be setting up an additional time in the coming weeks to have the conversation, the deeper dive on the project list. Okay, thanks everyone. Bryn, you want to take the reins, or Raquel?
Muted there. There we go. I think I'll go ahead and just continue moving into the second part of this agenda item. I will encourage folks because we're kind of moving out of the briefing phase here of this and more hoping for a little bit more engagement from folks. So I will encourage you all. I see a lot of just dark screens here. So I'll encourage all of you to turn on your camera. I see a number of OWRD staff, so you all are welcome to continue to leave your cameras off, but just to see the great folks in the room that we work with and be able to encourage a little more participation, I will be encouraging all of you to turn on your cameras, at least for parts of the meeting, so that way we can see your faces here. All right, great to see all of you. So moving into the second phase, some of you all may recall that during the, well, actually, I see that Danielle is back. So before we move on, I want to take a moment to introduce our new staff member, Danielle Gonzalez. She is taking over my previous position as the policy manager for the agency and will be working with all of you and looks forward to getting to meet with all of you here in the future. Danielle, do you want to say a couple words?
Yeah, hi, thank you very much for introducing me. Yes, I have a lot to learn. I know that up front, so I appreciate everybody's help and patience as I kind of get up to speed. And I have a good people to look to in Raquel and Tom and the whole group. They've been fantastic. So I hope to learn some more soon. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Danielle. All right, so you all may recall that during the 2021 second special session, the legislature approved $5 million in funding for cannabis water-related enforcement. And the department heard at that point in time a number of concerns from some of the water user stakeholders about the package, given the short turnaround time of that special session. The department agreed on the record to engage in further conversations on the two pieces of the budget items that were proposed. The first was related to a new enforcement section, and the second was whether the package would be limited to cannabis only work in regards to the enforcement section. And the second was related to providing funding for open ET through this package. So the department has met with some of the concerned parties, and we have engaged in some internal conversations and I've been hearing from some folks that they have an interest in hearing more about where we are at on that package. And so wanted to provide an update today. Certainly I would encourage folks, if you have thoughts on what we're proposing, we'd like to hear that today as well. And one of the things that I will note is that we do want to try to get this resolved here soon, because we are now holding up recruitments for our enforcement section. So this is one area where we'd love to have further conversations. So in terms of our proposal that we have, The first one related to the enforcement section. So you may recall that currently the department has 2 staff that work on enforcement in the Salem office. And these are the manager of the well construction and compliance section and the well licensing specialist. So these staff work on all enforcement, not just well-related enforcement, in addition to their responsibilities for our well program. And these staff, we find them having to drop their work when an enforcement comes through. And certainly it does take much longer for us to process enforcements because of the workload challenges in this section. Under our December budget proposal, the department proposed essentially to move the work of the well construction and compliance section related to enforcement over to a dedicated enforcement section that would process all agency enforcement actions. And the reason that we were proposing additional enforcement related staff for this section is because with this package, we received an additional 14 assistant water masters that are going to be focusing on cannabis enforcement. So we anticipate seeing an increase in enforcement and related work because of the increased focus on addressing those cannabis related issues. However, the alternate of having 2 separate enforcement sections essentially is inefficient from a training standpoint from our perspective, and also we have concerns that it could result in inconsistent procedures and practices. So, leaving the non-cannabis related work in with our existing staff and then having a new section that just focuses on the cannabis work. They're doing similar work, but having those be 2 separate sections, we do not think is the best practice. So to address some of the concerns that we've heard, the department is proposing to have 1 enforcement section that would work on both cannabis and non-cannabis enforcements. However, we're proposing to limit which positions within that section can work on non-cannabis related enforcements. So specifically, the department would propose that only the manager of the section and one of the NRS4 enforcement staff can work on both cannabis and non-cannabis enforcements. And the remaining staff within that section would only be allowed to work on those cannabis enforcements. And that essentially provides about the same level of staffing here. So the idea here is to provide that similar level of support for the non-cannabis related enforcement while providing the new and additional capacity that we need to support the cannabis enforcement, and also minimizing those inefficiencies caused by if we were to have 2 sections doing essentially these similar work with 2 different managers. So that's the first piece of this package. The second piece that we are wanting to talk about is, we understand that there is support for Open ET, and there's and what we heard is that we're really hearing from folks that there's a desire to have a different kind of funding mechanism than going through this package. And the department agrees with this approach. And so we will be including in our 2023 budget request additional funding for Open ET, or that's what we're proposing at least. And I know there's some additional details around continuing how Open ET will continue to be funded. I know they're also working with the feds on that question. So that's something we're proposing to move into our 2023 conversations. And instead, we would propose to shift for this package are the NRS3 hydrologists that would have been associated with that to NRS3 water master training specialists. And this is out of recognition that with these 14 additional assistant water masters, no additional management capacity, that really someone needs to focus on training these folks and making sure that we have consistent practices across the field. And so we would propose to create that kind of a position, which is something we've identified as needing even prior to having this very large expansion suddenly in regards to these assistant water master staff. And then we also would propose to create a water master district in the Applegate Basin, which is an area of the state where the department has experienced significant complaints and challenges related to cannabis. And so adding this position will split the workload for the water masters in the Thai cannabis area of the state, even as we're adding these additional assistant water masters. So this would provide that additional capacity there. And then we're also proposing to take an existing NRS3 water master that's in Douglas County and upgrade that position to an NRS4 as a result of the increased cannabis presence and workload complexity there. The remaining funding would then be available for addressing our AG costs related to these new cannabis enforcements. And also a key area that our agency really thinks is important here for the future is investing in communications capacity. As you all know, we have not had a communications person really since the 90s up until this past 2021 legislative session. And there was additional capacity added in this second special session. There's a need though to actually have funding for those folks to be able to purchase, do publications, mailers, those kinds of things, right? Videos, in order to proactively educate and inform cannabis producers about what Oregon water law is, and basically just broaden that understanding of Oregon water law. That's one of our significant challenges that we see. We're also looking to, as you all have heard from me, and we do have a bit of funding that we included for this, but we probably would like to see more, is that also expanding our ability in terms of translations and being able to provide this information in different languages. So that's another key piece that we see, particularly as we've seen in the Southwest region. Our water masters have noted an increased need for that. So I'm going to pause there, and I'd like to hear folks' thoughts on this. Of particular interest, we would like to get that enforcement section moving because it will become, we are starting to get those assistant water masters on board. We know the legislature has expectations, and there's this new 2022 law that was passed, which really is going to need that capacity. We had a meeting yesterday about the challenges that we're facing because we need to get staffed up, but we have this law now that's going into effect on the 91st day post sine die. So we've got some challenges there. So I'd really like to see if we can get this moving again now that we're all out of the legislative session. Kristen.
Well, I apologize. My question is not related to your enforcement priority, Raquel, but I wanted to better understand how this moving of funds from OpenET to the training position will alter what the department's plans are for use of OpenET going forward, what that means for schedules, just a bit deeper understanding, as well as kind of how that decision came about. If you could do a little bit deeper dive on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so I think that from our standpoint, we are looking to continue to use OpenET, and we have funding from the I want to say 2018, but that was the bill, from the 2021 session that essentially brings the data sets up to, I want to say it's 2021, it may be 2020, but I think it's 2021. And then there's the question of continuing funding for going forward, right? And that's what's being discussed more broadly. OpenET is discussing that with other states as well as with federal government. And this package had we proactively put forward what we were thinking is funding for continuing going forward. The new piece that we hadn't talked about before was use of this from a kind of as a screening tool for cannabis. And we've heard concerns about that And from our standpoint, OpenET, there is a lot of uses for that tool, and we want to continue to use that tool. And so from our standpoint, it's an important priority for us to be able to find and work with folks to move that tool along without it getting bogged down in concerns about, one particular potential use of it. So from our standpoint, we want to continue using the tool. The evapotranspiration data for water budgets is incredibly useful, and we just want to find a mechanism for funding that's not so directly tied to regulation and enforcement. Part of the idea around OpenET is, in terms of our rollout, is to, one of the proposals our staff has is to kind of formulate a group around this, and so that stakeholder groups, so that way we can continue to talk about how the data is used. Oh, you moved. There you are.
Sorry, well, I took my hand down, so it moves you. So are you, I guess it wasn't super explicit in your comments, are you saying that the concern is that with it being part of the cannabis package, it targets OpenET at cannabis enforcement as opposed to a broader water budgeting approach? Is that the concern that's been raised, or is there something else there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the short of it. I see Marianne, you have your hand raised, and so I'm going to see what Marianne has to say, and that may answer your questions further.
I had a different question, but I will answer. I mean, Kristen, it was fairly public. We were the ones that raised the concerns kind of heading into the December 13th, I think it was, 2021 special session, where we were like, hey, nobody talked to any of the water user groups about this, and we want to understand how this impacts broader enforcement. And learning more about the department around, how they would propose to use the OpenET tool. I think the concern that we had was not only that it would be shifting that tool from being something that was informational and had largely been supported and embraced by agricultural groups to potentially an enforcement tool that could be used against agriculture. And even then we were like, well, if it's just cannabis, maybe, but the problem was the way they were proposing to use the tool, you wouldn't, it could get like, it was basically looking at, is an area green that's not supposed to be green. And so it would be kind of a broader enforcement tool. And I was like, I'm probably fine with that if it's to catch, people who are illegally diverting and using water. But I think I know my concern was, is it going to start to be used as like, somebody hasn't transferred pivot corners, somebody hasn't done something, a point of diversion move, something like that, that I think is better caught through on the ground, one-on-one conversation where they can say, hey, I noticed this thing, you need to transfer your point of diversion. You need to transfer your pivot corners. Here's what you can do to fix it. To kind of more of a big brother, like we've looking at you from satellites, and here's what we think you need to change. And so I was, and point blank, he said, hey, if you guys want to use it this way, you can, but it's probably going to decrease the excitement within the ag community for OpenET as an informational tool once people think it's being used by the department for enforcement. And so I think just given the importance for OpenET for the future that I think we all agree on, I think that there was a reluctance to do that when there are plenty of other ways to get at cannabis enforcement and illegal use, especially with the number of additional boots on the ground that came through that package. So that was what our concern was, is not even so much that it would catch illegal use, because we're fine with that, but that it would catch places where people were intending to have legal use but didn't know, and kind of circumvent a conversation of like, hey, you need to transfer your POD, you need to transfer your pivot corners, you need to do these things to bring your water right into compliance. So that was the concern, is it would take what was what had been this awesome thing that we all agreed on and all supported, and potentially turn it into an enforcement tool that would maybe have less agreement and support right as it was ramping up its use and importance as an informational tool.
Well, I'll just look forward to that stakeholder group that you're proposing for more conversations about the rollout of OpenET and its continued use in future years. Thank you, and sorry to
Thank
waylay
you.
the conversation on that.
No, I appreciate it. And Marianne, I want to come right back to you. Jordan, I saw you turn on your camera, so I just wanted to make sure that there was nothing that that you needed to correct in regards to OpenET, or were you just?
Nope. No. Yeah, I think
Okay. All right.
mainly we looked at it as an opportunity to help support OpenET, but we're kind of learned
Thank
as we
you.
learned more about it, it didn't make sense to continue. So thanks for bringing up the concerns.
Thank you. Okay, Marianne. So I think that takes us back to what your actual comment or
and just
question
one
was.
other thing to add, Kristen and Raquel, I don't know if this is true or not, but I will say on our end, there was no intent to at all change the OpenET money that came through House Bill 2018, the work that was happening in 2021. To me, this was an add-on to OpenET for enforcement that was kind of like, we'll add on this thing. Oh, maybe that doesn't actually make sense. So I don't think it should. I mean, the whole intent is that it doesn't change the work, support, investment in OpenET that came out of 2021. And we certainly want to support that. And that was where the concern was of like, how do I explain to my members that this awesome tool that was supposed to be informational is now going to be used against them, which is always their biggest fear. So Raquel,
so just to add on to that, I do hear the points you're making, and it seems like this is a done deal, so I don't want to belabor it. But as someone who lives in that part of the state and deals on a regular basis with the impacts of this at such a scale, as well as seeing, what happens on the ground for the water masters and the very real risks that they're at, I think I continue to believe that making every possible tool available for this is really, really important. And so I appreciate the nuance that you're raising there, and we certainly support the broader effort around it. But I live every day in that space, and anything that limits our ability to address it, definitely, I think I have a different perspective on that. It's the boots on the ground approach to identifying these comes with very real risk for safety and other challenges. So again, we should move on. I'm wailing the conversation, but I think those tools that protect safety are important too. So
Kristen, you and I agree on that point, and there are so we have not said we're not going to use satellite imagery, and Marianne knows that. So I'll just leave it at that. And there's other folks here that, or maybe not in this conversation, I'm mixing people now, but there has been some work done in that southwest part of the state by some local folks. We also have, there's Google Earth. So there's other mechanisms that we can use, as Marianne and I have discussed, and like you and I can all go on to Google today and access, it's not the exact same information, but there are other tools out there, and we are not saying that we are not going to use those. So hopefully that, at least provides a little assurance to you on that front.
Yeah, and I mean, I will emphasize too, I mean, our members are living it every day too. And I mean, at the end of the day, all enforcement has to happen through boots on the ground, and the safety of the water masters is everyone's key feature. And I think that's part of why there's some of the backlog, because you guys have to wait for sheriffs, and there's obviously a lack of sheriff resources. But to my actual question, Raquel, you mentioned, and I'm going to get this wrong, but kind of an education related position directed at cannabis. And my question for you is, given the, I think it's House Bill 4061, but it might be 4016. And those two numbers are both cannabis and easily confused. I think it was 4061 that's requiring legal grows on both the marijuana and hemp side to have the signature from the local water master saying that there's, that they have a valid water right. I guess I'm wondering,
that provision didn't pass, Marianne.
What didn't?
The signature from the water master, that provision didn't pass. Right, Bryn? Or am I misremembering? It was a fast session.
Yeah, it was quick. Raquel is correct. So that piece got pulled out in the -4 amendments, which were the ultimate amendments that passed. So the
Oh,
water
man, I had
statement
missed
piece
that.
is no longer included in that bill.
Okay, I did not catch that happening, which is kind of wild. Okay, so never mind then. I think that does away with my question, because I had thought that was in there and was wondering if that education was needed, given that that should have gone to legal growth. Is that idea coming back? Because at least within my membership, there was a lot of support for that idea.
So OLCC has, my understanding is OLCC has had authority, and I think they've done it before, and so they may be reinstituting it. I need to check in with them on where they're at on that. And that's the only thing that I've heard of, if there is such an effort. In terms of the education component on House Bill 4061, we're seeing it as, and I appreciate you all digging into this. This is an important issue for us, so I appreciate folks engaging here. So the bill, we need to do education and outreach to water haulers. So the bill includes provisions related to water haulers need to maintain records of where they've hauled irrigation and nursery water to. So that is a new industry that we've never engaged with, really. I mean, I shouldn't say we've never engaged with. That is a new industry for us. And so we'll be working on that. The other piece is that there's also penalties if they provide deliver water to a grow that is not registered. And so that's also going to be something that is important for us to make sure that they understand. In addition, the bill has some requirements for water providers. So folks that are providing the bulk water fill stations in terms of their record keeping. And so we'll be doing outreach there. There's also then folks that are not going to a water hauling business, but are hauling their own water, because the bill applies to hauling water for nursery purposes. And so if you are not essentially paying for someone to do that, and you're having you or your own employees hauling that water, then you need to keep those records. So those are some of the key components. And then there's also, Bryn, what am I missing? Those are the key ones that I'm thinking of at the moment in terms of communication. So,
yeah.
So you can see there's a lot of outreach that we need to do. We're thinking about this bill in the context of needing to, so we'll be reaching out to you, Marianne, to try to get information in Farm Bureau's newsletters, some of the hemp and cannabis industry newsletters. We'll be reaching out to LOC and SCAO to try to be able to reach out to the districts. In addition, we have to create a whole list through our own means, because there is no list of water haulers. So there's going to be quite a bit of work associated with this. And unfortunately, we're still in the process of actually trying to hire those positions, which does mean if we're talking about capacity, I have Bryn working on this right now, and that means that we're not getting as much done on setting up the transfers of storage water work group or setting up the fees work group. So I just want to, it's all on our plates and we're thinking about it, but we are trying to manage the different priorities that we've been given. Steve, Marianne, did you have anything else?
Although I just realized the chat was disabled. I have something that was a small point, but would have been appropriate for the chat. Just to know, because you mentioned OLCC does it, ODA has also required people to put like their water rights certificate in their application for a while. So there may still be an educational, even though it's not the sign off isn't required anymore for the hemp grows, there might be more ODA could do and an educational piece going with that, because they are trying to, they collect that information. They just don't have verification of it now, which was why we supported that happening in 4061. And I really thought I had gotten in there. So my bad on that, but
Yeah.
I think there's maybe more that can be done there.
So Marianne, I think we will be going through and kind of auditing like we were doing with the one hemp position where Scott was going out, Scott Pros. I think we have Scott C over here, who's our other Southwest region in the midst of a lot of the cannabis challenges down there. But he had gone through and started going through the registered sites and following up with them, educating them, and we got a lot of folks into compliance through that process. And so I still think that we will be doing that with these additional assistant water masters in addition to the work. It just won't be through the process that was provided in the legislation. But okay, let's go to Stan.
Yeah, I'll go
Steve,
back.
did you put your Stan right before we go? Steve, did you put your hand down because I called on you and then went back? Did you have, because you were actually first.
I did, Raquel. Good morning. Good to see you.
Okay, Stan, we'll come back to you. Don't put your hand down though. I have a short attention span apparently. Steve, good to hear from you.
Yeah, to sort of directly to the topic at hand, it's a fairly high level comment. Over the years, as the department's budget has been whittled away, field services has taken a pretty hard hit. And yeah, the trend has been to sort of pull back and do only those things that are most necessary or most emergent, I guess. And so my general comment is, yeah, I realize cannabis is the issue du jour and the legislature has provided some specific direction here, but I am seeing more and more, I think now probably the phone calls that I'm getting is somewhat symptomatic of a long-term decline in the amount of resources available to field services to get out there, as Marianne was discussing, and get on the ground with water users and be able to really help to resolve problems as much as anything else. And it's differential from basin to basin. Certain water masters who have been there for a long time have an art, have developed the relationships and are able to work a lot of times as solution managers as much as regulators. And I think that is the art of the job that needs to be trained and needs to be, to the extent possible, replicated and reinforced, and that takes funding. So when we're talking about only, I guess, sustaining existing levels of field services, water masters and assistant water masters, other than cannabis, to me, that's a problem because we're not doing a good job as it is today. It's not enough to get the job done that needs to be done. And so what we're seeing are these protests among water users where they're in each other's business because the problems have not been solved on a personality level early on, or because the department is refusing to look beyond the point of diversion and try to help people sort of generally within a basin try to solve some of these issues. And that's a very general statement. There have been meetings where the department's tried to facilitate basin-wide discussions and things like that. So I don't mean to cast aspersions. Largely, it's a trend. And what I'm seeing is the lawyer that gets the phone calls is more and more of these. And when I look at the root cause, it feels like it's because the department hasn't had the resources to get engaged and to try to help solve the problems early on. So my pitch here is that we don't shortchange all of the rest of the field services division in the name of dealing with the cannabis issue. I realize it's a very significant one. I have lots of clients down in that part of the state, but we've got to keep our eye on the bigger ball too. This is an essential service that the department needs to perform, does perform, and frankly, I think in the end, if you're looking at economic efficiencies, it's the kind of thing where if you invest the money there on the front end, you're going to avoid a lot of the protest dollars on the back end.
Steve, I appreciate those comments, and I actually did not find those to be negative. I found it to be what we have been concerned about as well. So I appreciate those comments. One thing I would note is that one of the plus sides of this package in terms of the impacts on the issues that you're talking about, it was that, for example, in the southwest region of the state, our water masters down there, they're basically almost just spending their time on cannabis, right? So it's a significant amount of their workload. And so having these additional resources will actually free them up a little bit to be able to focus on the rest of their job, right? That they haven't been able to focus on in recent years. And so that I see as something that is at least helpful from your standpoint. I think the other thing too is that these new assistant water masters will be doing at least some of the regular assistant water master duties, and that will also help. It's not, to your point, it does not address kind of the broader needs for field, but it does certainly provide us a significant step in the right direction. All right, let's go to Stan. Thank you, Stan, for waiting.
No problem. I actually think my comments are going to dovetail with Steve's pretty good here. I don't really have any comments about how the department structures internally their water enforcement section. I really think that the department should be able to figure out what the most efficient way for them to operate is. So my comments tend to be a little broader in nature. And as I think the enforcement is a really important piece that we need to focus on in the long run. And so far I'm hearing it framed as a status quo plus the cannabis. And I think if we vision for years out there, once the cannabis problem is a little more tempered, that it still remains as a broad, big issue. And it's probably because there's a lot of pent up demand for enforcement that just hasn't happened over the years. And I think a lot of it is culturally driven by, you have to turn in your neighbor in order for something to happen. So it's not really been a proactive approach that we've taken in the long run. People don't want to turn in their neighbor and then not have anything happen about it. So I think we need to have a bigger vision about how do we more proactively go after it. And the cannabis is a more proactive approach to it. And we may see that unleash some pent-up demand for water rights enforcement outside of the cannabis issues we're dealing with right now. So I want to make sure we think longer term that enforcement is something we really need to pay attention to.
Hey, Raquel.
Thank you, Stan.
If I could just weigh in briefly, Stan, I appreciate your comment, and Steve's as well. And I do think that we are at an inflection point where we do need to be thinking strategically about how we can best manage the resource for Oregonians going forward, because we are in an era of scarcity. And so it's not business as usual. It's not how things worked 20 years ago or 40 years ago. And so we need to figure out how we can best manage things, because I think it's happening in basins across the state where we're regulating back further and further and touching people that we weren't talking to 25 years ago. And so I think it does really suggest a need for us to be very thoughtful about how we approach this, but it's probably going to be some, a combination of boots on the ground and tools that we can bring forward to help work with these communities of water users and other interests around the state to help manage this precious resource. So I appreciate both of your comments.
So Stan and Steve, based on these comments, I work in buckets sometimes in my head. So I am putting these comments kind of into the bucket of our budget issues that we have for 2023. So I want to make sure, Bryn, as we're taking notes here, if we can make sure we put a section in there, if we don't already have one, on field, to make sure that gets, the broader issues get discussed in regards to the budget for 2023. April.
April,
I see.
jump on top
Yeah,
of you.
Steve.
Sorry. just a quick follow-up comment on that. I don't want it to get lost. This is about resources to hire enough people to do the job so people aren't working 80 hours a week and driving hundreds of miles a day. But it's also, like I said, from my perspective, it's to some degree a cultural training exercise, and that's really hard to do. But it really is about making sure there's enough resources allocated to the training process, not just sitting down in a room for a couple of days once a year, but figuring out how to train people in dispute resolution as much as anything, I think is critical to having good success in the field. And by the way, Siobhan is really good at that himself. That's why he can actually do all these things all at once. So.
Okay, thank you. That I connected the dots with that last comment. Thank you so much for that comment there. April.
Okay, I was like, I put my hand down, so I didn't know if that meant that I'd get lost. Okay, so my original comments might have been more succinct, but too much time went past. So just on the cannabis topic, which I do think, Raquel, this is both in the 2021 implementation as well as looking ahead to 2023 discussions. I think dovetailing on other comments that have been made, it's important to support efficiencies at the department. And as we've talked about in other forums, while the illegal water use associated with cannabis crops are definitely a challenge and an issue that needs to have some attention to it, the enforcement issues around that illegal water use should really be no different than any other illegal water use, with the caveats of the additional risks and work that's involved. So with that being said, I think just wanted to echo that I'm supportive of the department finding efficiencies and using the existing resources to enforce upon various illegal water use. When it comes to the use of Open ET as a tool, I just want to echo the comments made by my agricultural colleagues that this is something that needs more discussion. It's something that I myself have a lot of questions and concerns about. And I think while it has a lot of prospect as a tool in multiple ways, it is something where if the agricultural community is alienated and feels that this is something they need to be afraid of, then it will work in the absolute reverse of what we're hoping with that. So that being said, I think particularly with the cannabis issues or the illegal water use associated with cannabis crops, it's most important to make sure that the department has on the ground boots to support enforcement along with their essential enforcement duties that don't have to do anything with cannabis. And it is something where, in my opinion, although you guys are have the data on that this has been an area that has been underfunded in the department. And I am very supportive of there being additional field staff to support those regions, particularly down south where Siobhan and other folks are just completely overwhelmed, and we need to make sure that they do have those resources. But I do think that along with many other issues that we're about to talk about, Open ET is one that those of us that are interested in that, and I think that's both the water user stakeholders as well as the conservation interests who have a genuine desire, and also seeing that as a useful tool that we get together and talk through those different issues and make sure that there is the sufficient data and different aspects associated with Open ET that can ameliorate some of those concerns that our folks have. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, April. So I guess maybe where I'll leave this today is there anyone that wants to have further conversations on what we're proposing, or is this something that folks are feeling comfortable with us moving forward on? And I know there may be a couple folks that I want to check in with that are not on here, but okay. All right. Well, I think that means thank you all for the great conversation today. I know these virtual meetings can be, they're always fun, right? For different reasons, just you don't get to see people in person though. So Bryn, I think that it is time for you to take back the agenda.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so we're a little off agenda, but I think that's okay and that's good based on how great all those conversations were. So I will flag that the rest of the agenda is really legislative concept discussion heavy. We have some time for a pop discussion, basically giving folks an opportunity to share verbal feedback if they didn't have the opportunity to share written feedback. But you know, we will make sure that we have adequate time to discuss all the LCs on this list, and you know, we'll take time out of our pop discussion if we're not able to get back on track.
Bryn?
So yes,
Just maybe to help folks understand a little bit of the bigger picture here, we are planning at our next month's meeting to get more in depth on POPs, and so policy option packages, budget issues, those things, because we found that a lot of the feedback we were getting from all of you was coming in, or some of it was coming in this past week. We haven't had time to digest it. Some of you have asked for a little bit more time. So if you need more time, please, if you can get it to us this week, the sooner the better, because we're going to be actively moving to take and integrate that feedback into our discussions for our next meeting. So the sooner you get it to us, the better able we are to take that feedback in. If you prefer to have a verbal conversation and we run out of time today, feel free to reach out to Bryn and we can set that up. But we do want to make sure that we're you know, continuing to keep the process moving, but that we're also hearing from all of you. So there will be a lot of time though next month to talk more about the POPs. Just note that we'll just be at a different phase because we'll be coming to you all instead of with, here's what our issues are, we'll be coming to you with, okay, here's what we're proposing to do about them based on what we've heard from everyone. So the reason we're focusing on POPs today, or not POPs, the other thing,
LCs.
legislation, there we go, is because we have an April 15th deadline to at least tell the governor's office and DAS that here's the suite of ones that we're pursuing. They prefer that we have language in, so you will see today that we have language in on some of them that we'd like to discuss with you, so we want to spend that time. There's other ones that we will submit and tell them, here's the topic, we don't know the details, we'll get that to you by June. So just so you have some context around the timings, and we want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to engage with us. That generated some questions. Bryn, I'm going to hand it back to you to facilitate that.
Thanks, Raquel. So I saw Peggy's hand go up and then Oriana's hand.
Thank you. I just really want to follow up with the, I understand the need to push back on the POPs discussion, but it would be helpful to know if you've gotten new DAS requirements, regulations, instructions around budget issues, so that as we talk about those in the future and provide you with input, are we saying the world is our oyster, or are we saying we maybe have shrimp?
Yes, thank you for that. Lisa Snyder, are you still on? I know that the budget kickoff meeting happened last week, and the budget instruction came out last week. In terms of what they're forecasting, I don't know that I've heard either direction. I've heard some that are like, well, it may be a small cuts budget, and then I've heard others where it won't. But the rumor mill is still out there on that one. So I don't know if Lisa heard anything, and maybe she has since jumped off. But if not, I guess I don't see her on here anymore.
Lisa's there. Lisa's there, Raquel.
I'm here.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I was trying to figure out which camera I was using and which headset I was using. So as far as the budget instructions from last week, the world is our oyster, apparently, according to the instructions from last week, they are not going to limit the amount or number of pops that we can ask for at this point.
Thank you, Lisa.
Good to hear.
Thank you.
All right, Oriana.
Yeah, this is a little bit more of a process request than a question, if I may, which is that looking at these wonderfully put together spreadsheets that help outline your LCs and your POPs, and then also some of the project work. It would be really helpful for those of us who are really interested from a community engagement perspective to just understand who you're working with on these different concepts and budget ideas and projects, like who is being engaged. And then in particular, from Faraday's perspective, we're interested to know, how our environmental justice community is being engaged in this work in particular, especially now that we have legislation from the last session that gives a little bit more direction and process on that front. I think it's important for the department to really both be transparent about kind of like who's in the mix on some of these concepts, because even if we're all coming together now as stakeholders to give feedback, there's still an origin for all of this that is, I think, helpful to understand. And for those of us who aren't directly involved in issues, there may still be a flag if it seems like, oh, this community who's really impacted hasn't necessarily been consulted. And I think a good example of that would be, and this may be getting ahead of ourselves, so apologies if that's the case, on the planning side of things, is just understanding, did you consult with the existing place-based planning processes in the development of this concept, and how do they feel about moving away from a place-based planning approach to an approach that is a little bit more ad hoc and provides multiple paths of engagement. And I think from our perspective, we feel differently about that concept if there hasn't been some engagement on that front. So just that request of some transparency, so we know who you're talking to, and in these meetings we can say, hey, if you haven't talked to this person and they couldn't be at this meeting, that's a really important thing that may be determinant, not just for my organization, but for others in terms of how we feel about where an idea is coming from.
Oriana, thank you so much for that. And that is really the kind of feedback that we need, because we're new to this work as well. And we may have blind spots. So I appreciate you flagging that. And with place-based planning, we've got a longer list. And so we're happy to follow up with you on that. And we're still in the process on that one. The other ones, I think the shorter answer is, so we have sent out a letter to the tribes asking if they would like to engage in consultation. We haven't heard back yet from any folks in particular at this point in time. But the rest of the engagement so far has been through these groups here in terms of the other legislative concepts and the budget packages. The place-based planning groups have been invited to, at least the conveners have been invited to these meetings. We've also met with them, Bryn met with them, I think. Bryn, is that right? A couple weeks ago as well at their quarterly meetings. And we have intentions for more engagement with them, both on the budget side and on the planning side. But so that hopefully that gives you some information. We can give you more details, but at a general level, a lot of the work is being done with these groups here, and also trying to, if we need to have further, more detailed conversations, but not everybody's interested, then we'll be pulling some of these offline as needed.
Great. Jeff.
Yeah, I was going to add that this is the time that we're doing it now. So, Ariana, I would say that this is the place where you would engage, and it's incumbent upon, I think this group has done a good job of trying to get these people here. There are a number of these concepts that I have questions about that I have not seen until it was released. And so we're all in that same boat. I think it's also incumbent that we all do the work and do the work with the department to try to make sure they get as much feedback as possible. So I appreciate the intent of those comments, but I would say, this is the place where those get started hashed out. So I want to make that clear.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. We're certainly looking to engage here. We're also looking as needed to, if we need, having individual conversations. So I should say, we've met with some of the folks. Oriana, you, I think, heard about that conversation, and I think you may have attended that one, or maybe you weren't there for our meeting with some of the folks from the Racial Justice Council and the Oregon Water Futures group. Other those conversations, I think we ended up having broader discussions. We've also done individual briefings as requested with other organizations, and we're happy to do that as well. So we want to make sure that we're providing the space if needed to, have conversations and make sure we're getting that feedback.
Oriana, is that a new hand or is that your old hand?
It is a new hand, because I feel like perhaps my point was not well understood. And there's perhaps an assumption here that I don't understand how this meeting works or what its purpose is. What I am talking about here is what is the engagement that's happening outside of this space. And the reality is not everyone can make this kind of meeting. I don't see any of the place-based planning groups here. There may be a reason for that. And there are side conversations that happen in this work in ways that are sometimes need to be documented from transparency's sake and sometimes don't. And it's also worth noting that these ideas don't come from a vacuum necessarily, even if we're all working through them here in this big transparent space, which is great, and how other agencies do their work in some cases. But there's still, I think what I'm getting at is a much deeper understanding who is impacted by an issue and how those entities have been engaged outside of this space in ways. And I think that really comes up for more of a true community perspective. And an example of that would be which Southwest Oregon communities are you talking about some of this cannabis enforcement work? Like, we're all broad organizations that don't necessarily have the boots on the ground, even if we have members who are engaging with. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at a little bit more, is less the where's the forum to talk about this work, which is very clearly this, but also the how are we trying to go beyond this particular forum and making sure that we're engaging directly with folks who may not be able to make a meeting at 9 a.m. On a Tuesday in a way, but are still impacted by this work and need some opportunities to engage or give feedback. And I think that really comes up from the true community perspective as opposed to the association or membership perspective. And that's important from our perspective. So sorry to be a little bit salty here, but I feel like my point was a little bit missed. And if it's still not clear, I'm happy to try to clarify that more.
Oriana, I totally understand your point. And the fact of the matter is that we don't have the resources and nor the time at this point to do that kind of extensive outreach. But I think that's something that we were trying to move toward. And I appreciate the lens that you bring to the table, because it's helpful for us, because I think it's breaking us out of a mold that we've been in for some time. But we are hamstrung a little bit. Stay tuned on place-based planning, because we haven't been working in a silo. We've been talking with the place-based planning folks. Last week at our commission meeting, there was an independent evaluation of place-based planning that those groups participated in. And so there's a lot of conversation going on, and we've been getting a lot of feedback from those folks along the way. They all know, I think, pretty darn well that there's that program is slated to expire at the end of this biennium. And so I'm pretty confident that we've been getting feedback from those folks to help inform what path we might take. We still have a lot to do. It's not the cake has not been baked on our end, and we still have a lot to do with you all and others to form that idea, let alone the feedback that we might get from the regional water and planning work group. So it's a work in progress.
This is Donna Beveridge.
So, hey,
Hi
Donna.
there. Hi, I'm a convener for the Upper Grand Ronde Place-Based Planning Group. And we just went to the Oregon Water Resource Commission Thursday and presented our plan. And here, I'll put see if I can figure out I don't know how to make my camera work, sorry. Anyway, we got 100% yes votes for our plan. And I'm here and I'm listening. So I guess one of the things, I appreciate what Oriana said. Definitely, sometimes it is hard for us to be able to attend all these meetings. And I appreciate that you're wanting more outreach, because I think that is very important. And part of our presentation was lessons learned, things that went well, things that could have been better. So, yep, I'm here listening, and I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. I'm going to give you a little clap because I did not get to see that part of the presentation, but congratulations. And so I want to just do a time check here. Peggy, we're going to go to you. And then what I will note is that for place-based planning, there's a whole lot more engagement that we are planning. This is part of our community engagement plan that we have developed in consultation with the governor's office and the environmental equity subcommittee of the Racial Justice Council. So we are talking about some additional workshops and things like that. We're still in the planning phase, to Tom's point, because of our limited resources. So I appreciate, Oriana, I do want to hear more from you about who are we missing. That's what we greatly need. So I appreciate that. And Peggy, I think we'll call on you, and then I'd like to turn away from this part of the conversation and move into the LCs.
Yeah, and that's where I'm really where I'm going, is to answer the other part of Ariana's question. The LCs that are before us today have been a long discussion. And so they are not something that just appeared. The transfer of storage and split season leasing, for instance, have been long discussions before the legislature. So it's not as if it's just one group that's bringing that this session. And I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you, Peggy. All right, Bryn, trying to find your face on the screen. Back to you.
I'm here. Great. Okay, thank you all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sharing my screen just so we can all be sure that we're looking at the same documents. So these are I'm going to be sharing essentially the documents that I sent out last night, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So we're going to zip through our placeholder legislation. And we're mainly going to be focusing on the relating to clauses, just since that is the primary piece of the LC that we've developed. So we just kind of wanted to run the relating to clauses past you all to make sure that we're on the right track and maybe get some feedback there. So we'll start with the transfers of stored water business. So as a reminder, we received funding via House Bill 3103 to facilitate a work group on the location and place of use changes, including a discussion of environmental criteria as it comes to transfers of stored water. So as I mentioned, this is a placeholder piece of legislation. So because those conversations are ongoing right now, we are just kind of developing we don't quite know exactly what the details are going to be, but we want to make sure that we leave space for those. So essentially what we have crafted is a relating to clause that is pretty broad and will hopefully encompass the variety of conversations that might happen as we convene that work group. So I think the main ask for today on the first two LCs in terms of transfers and the fee program is primarily around the relating to clause and ensuring that we're on the right track. So first relating to clause, I'll flag for the transfers, is relating to a water right that authorizes the storage of water. And I see a variety of hands going up. So I am trying to toggle between screens right now. So I appreciate your patience. Yeah, Raquel.
Before we go to questions and comments, I just want to note for folks on these two, so if you're not familiar with the legislative, how the legislature does things is they typically, when there's a bill that's a placeholder, really you want it to just be, you're trying to get the right relating to clause so you can gut and stuff it. So I know all of you know this, but we are not intending to pursue section 1, 2, and 3 of this bill. So I know that sometimes there's confusion that, oh, the agency wants to study this issue. We do not want to study this issue. We want to have our work group. We want to be done with the work group. We want to gut and stuff this bill. So that is the purpose of this and the purpose of the next one.
Thanks, Raquel. I appreciate that clarification. Great. So I see Jeff, Mark, and Marianne's hand in that order.
This one got my attention.
Yes,
certainly.
it did.
That was Johnny on the spot to raise my hand. I mean, the related, this is an important issue, and I'm grateful for it to be raised. There's a lot of roadway and obstacles that are incumbently attached to this. Just as a word of warning, the broader the relating clause, the more mischief you will find by people that you do not anticipate having a different agenda than perhaps what the department is intending here. My question is, what is the department intending here? I mean, is it to show that the AG's opinion is garbage, hot garbage, I would say, because I believe it is. But I just want to, I just want to know if this is like a redefinition or something else. So this is the reason that I canceled my association meetings this morning to be on the call, because I wanted to be here and just express my interest in trying to help you figure out what this is.
So, Bryn, do you want to respond, or would you like me to?
You can go ahead.
Okay. So Jeff, I'm cracking up a little bit here because this always shows, you know, everybody has different perspectives. Because from my standpoint, I'm like, this is straightforward, what we've done in the past, and you know, where we've had a placeholder actually for transfers of stored water. We did this a couple sessions ago too. And so really there's no bigger plan other than to have a placeholder for the work group. So at least that's from our perspective. That's the intent for this bill, is placeholder for whatever the solution is that comes out of the work group, because we all know we're going to have a solution, right, from the work group. Well, we hope so. But so that's all we're looking for. And the reason that we put these relating to clauses up is because we want narrow ones, and we want to make sure that we're getting what we need in order to be able to address the solution that we don't know what it is yet, but that is still sitting, that we need to work through. So that's what this is about.
All right, Mark.
I share Jeff's concern here. I think this relating to clause is too broad. We, as you know, addressed half of this pie with the character of use, and that part of the problem has been resolved. The remaining problem is the location. And I just think that this relating to clauses is too broad. Myself, Raquel, I understand the purpose. I know that you have a group that will get together and come up with proposed solutions that we may not know what they are at this time, but I fear that this relating to clause is a little broad for my comfort. But I also understand that you can't necessarily anticipate any solutions before a work group puts its head together. I'm almost of the opinion that you just write relating to water and leave it at that. But I also know that that's wildly dangerous as well. So I'm really torn on this, Raquel, and
yeah.
I'm pretty uncomfortable with the proposed relating clause at this point.
Thank you, Mark. So I will encourage you all to, if you have ideas for a relating to clause, this is why we do this, right? Because Bryn put forward one, and I was like, no, that one is the two subjects, right? Because from our standpoint, there's actually two issues. There's the location and there's the point of diversion. And you can't have, we wanted to do relating to changes to the location and point of diversion, which is obviously violates the two subjects one. So if folks have one that they think is a better one, Mark, we're not doing relating to water, just so you know. That's a hard no on that one. So
how about relating to Oregon, Raquel?
I think Representative Clem had said that he had tried that one and Elsie had told him no. So, all right, let's go to send us your feedback on that. We do want to hear if folks think that there is something missing. We're certainly interested.
Great. Mary Ann and then April.
Yeah, and I probably less on the relating to clause. I guess in some respects, I like that this leaves everything open again because I had wanted a unified solution. And so I guess this leaves open the possibility of, looking back and looking forward if we need to. The assurance that I'm looking for, Raquel, is that, last time I think there were an LC and promises of convening people to, find that big solution, and we never got there. And then we ended up with piecemeal legislation that no secret we opposed it because it was piecemeal legislation. I just want a commitment from the department that we're not heading down that path again, because you guys have a lot on your plate and a lot of priorities on your plate. And I think this is a really important one, but I think it's also going to be a time consuming and energy intensive one if we're really looking for a legislative solution. So I'd either like to put the time and energy into finding a full legislative solution, or not go down this path again where right before session, oh, sorry, we don't have anything, and we end up kind of battling it out in the legislature because we've been down that road and it was exhausting the first time and would be exhausting again.
Marianne, my intention would not be to run this legislation unless we have, a couple things for us to think about is we don't have to make we have to make a decision by April 15th whether to put something in. We do not have to make a decision until around November timeframe, October, November. And really, I could argue maybe into December, because typically the governor's office doesn't file these until December. And we have a conversation October, November timeframe with the governor's office. Although, gosh, who knows what it'll be like, because we'll be in the middle of this election and changeover. But generally, there's still the opportunity to pull concepts even at that point in time. So that's one thing. The other piece is, I don't know how long the work group's going to take, and I can't control what other folks do, but from my perspective, I don't want to spend more time. I want to spend the time through the work group to get this done. And it may take longer than we may have to go after the 2023 session. I don't know how long it takes, but our goal is also to see if we can make it, shorter and specific and try to get it done. So I guess I'm saying in both directions, I don't want to run legislation if we're not ready. My hope is that the work group will have a specific time frame and that will be done to try to get to solutions. But if that doesn't happen, I don't really want to run legislation on it. So that's kind of my take on it. April.
Thanks. So a couple thoughts here. One, for those who aren't as seasoned as some of the others that have participated in these processes before, just kind of going up a few levels as you guys have stated, but just to reiterate that, the relating to clause needs to be broad enough to encompass what the issue that would be in the legislative concept would involve, but not be too broad, i.e. we do not want a relating to water bill. Nobody ever wants a relating to water bill. So I'm glad that Raquel and I are on the same page on that one, although I know she really loves to do that. It happened before. But I will say that looking back at some of the previous concepts that related to this issue, pun intended, we've actually had some that were just related to stored water, which would seem even broader than this. So I could be okay with the relating to clause. But I think going back into the specifics, so ensuring that there is a broad and balanced way to make sure that changes to the location of stored water can be facilitated just as much as changes to the character of use of stored water. I think that in my mind, especially in the absence of a work group even being contemplated starting, it seems far too premature for this to be a 2023 legislative concept. Now, to make sure that I'm exceptionally clear in that, being able to make changes to the location of stored water is an issue of paramount importance to our members. However, we do not have any member who is right on the cusp of needing that change to happen immediately. And this has been an issue that has been discussed in at least the last 4 legislative sessions and has been fraught by different legal action. And I think my understanding is there may be additional legal action underway as well. So I think it's something that, again, I think it's premature for a legislative concept. And if there is, unlike some of the other concepts that we have talked about and will talk about, where having a placeholder makes sense, I'm not entirely sure that this one does, or if it does, again, we need to have that commitment that there's not going to be some half-baked concept that gets entered into the legislative arena without the necessary conversations. And I don't just mean with water users. There's a variety of conservation interests who've been involved in these conversations. And it's something I think we need to ensure that there is a good solution for all of us. So hopefully that made sense.
Great. Thank you, April. Okay, I don't see any more hands. I'll pause
Bryn,
before.
can I
Yes.
ask a question?
Yep.
Are folks saying that that maybe we just shouldn't have a placeholder, and that if there is a solution that we
Raquel, I
Sorry.
was probably the
Yeah.
most vociferous on this, and I'm not saying that it shouldn't be. I think there's an issue that we kind of split the baby the last time, and Mary Ann pointed that out correctly, that we had hoped for it to be comprehensive, but it was not. So I do think that there is a solution that needs to happen here, and that's the reason that I asked about kind of the tenor of it. Is it to get what we believe is the more accurate definitions that the AG kind of took us off the rails on, or is it something to try, as you described? I just was trying to get a clarification there. There's a long road between here and there anyway, and I would encourage people who are interested in this topic to jump in with both feet, because and strap on, because it's gonna be a long and hard ride. How's that for a non-sports metaphor? I struggled with it.
And I'll just jump in, is that I feel this way on several concepts, and not just with this agency, but others, is that we're still catching up on what, and you guys are still catching up with what was provided in 2021. And that's both resources as well as direction, let alone the special session. And I just feel like in order for all of us to be successful in seeing good water policy and good water funding going forward, we need to be focused in making sure that we've accomplished what's already underway. And I, just speaking for myself, I still feel like I'm behind on trying to catch up on all those things from 2021. And while we've got the regional planning work group that's going on, which is a huge commitment for those of us that are a part of it, that's just like one of a million things. I mean, okay, it's not a million, it's like 20, 30, however many things. And I mention that because I think that it's something that talking about some of the other comments that have been made today, most of the entities that are participating in today's call and care about water are small entities with limited staff. And it's something where I think we're all stretched a little thin. And I suspect, Raquel, that I'm not alone and that I didn't get you any written feedback on these things because I haven't had the time to go through all that and have those necessary conversations with my members and the different stakeholders. And so I think it's not that I think it's a bad idea. I just think we need to be strategic in focusing on the things that are most likely to be successful, those things that have to get done. And then, oh, by the way, there's probably going to be a huge water shortage this year. And how is that going to further strain the relationships that we have and the demands that we're getting from our respective members? So a placeholder can always be thrown away, so to speak, and doesn't have to necessarily go forward. I just don't think that if we were to do a ranking, which I presume that we will do at some point, as we've done in the past, that for me, this one would not be as high on the radar of needs, not because it's not an important issue, just because it seems highly unrealistic that any of the conversations we need to have about it would be able to occur before an actual legislative concept would go forward. And then we're in the full session again, and we're all flailing about trying to respond. I'd like to be more positive about that, but it just feels like the breadth of issues and the things that we're all being faced with is just getting bigger and bigger. And I like to be good at the things I do and not feel like I'm doing everything in a way that makes me overly stretched thin. So thank you.
If I could weigh in.
April.
If I could weigh in, just Raquel, for just a sec. I think April's raising a really important point that I guess I would encourage everyone in this meeting to be thinking about. And this may connect to the conversation that we had at the outset of this meeting about sitting down and diving more deeply into the project list. Because I do think there is a bit of a quantity versus quality issue that I think we're all facing right now. And I'm not confident that we're going to be able to get everything done that's on our to-do list. And any feedback that we get from you all could be very helpful for us to help us kind of think through our prioritization around work. And remember, and I want to be clear, at least in my mind, and I'm not speaking for April here, but I don't think April's saying that we just drop this. It's the question of when does it happen? And so I think that is a question that we can ask ourselves as we talk about, especially as we get into option packages and funding, whether some of the work can be pushed into the next biennium, which would allow us to focus more on a higher priority list and a smaller list of focus area. So my point here, I guess, is I just encourage everyone to be thinking through that and looking through that lens, your own lens on that. And we would really encourage your feedback if you have any as we go through these conversations.
Thank you for that, Tom. That's exactly what I was going to say. Just to give folks a quick stretcher, and I don't know, this conversation is interesting, so I guess maybe folks don't need a quick stretcher, but by show of hands, this is your stretch. So this only works if you're on video. How many of you are feeling a bit pressured by all of the projects that have come from, well, the last two sessions? Because I know the agency certainly has, talked about this, but
Can you stop the screen
but
share
you
so
all
we
are
can
in
see
it.
others?
Yeah, Bryn, why don't you take the LC off? So everyone just so everybody gets a sense of being in the same boat together. How many folks are feeling like, oh my gosh, there is so much coming at us? So we've got quite a couple folks here. Oh, we're seeing more. All right, there we go. So this is something that has been on our radar, is that, we've been trying to communicate our resource challenges, and but we're not the only ones doing the work. And so I want to make sure that we continue to have these conversations, because we can only make good policy if we have folks at the table, right? At least from my standpoint. Bryn, this has been, I think where we'll probably leave it is we've got some further conversations around priorities, and it was related to the projects list. We will probably keep moving this one forward in the interim because we can always pull it. But the key for us is trying to get that right relating to clause in the event that we don't pull it. So Bryn, why don't we go to the next one? And with this next one, is this the fees one?
Yes.
There's a little bit more latitude in regards to the funding associated with this one. So Bryn, why don't you kick this one off?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Raquel. So this one is similar to the transfers conversation. So this is a stakeholder or a placeholder bill. So preparation to gut and stuff. We received funding from 2021 to essentially host a work group and develop a more sustainable long-term funding mechanism to support our fee-based programs. So again, this is a placeholder, and we're kind of looking for the feedback on the relating to clause with the intent that we want to keep it broad enough that any solutions that may arise in those conversations may be able to be brought forward with the, with the acknowledgement that that might be a longer, broader conversation that might not be ready, but we want to hold space for us to be able to act on that if we need to.
Yeah, so Bryn, the thing on this one too is that the funding that we received related to being able to provide support for the work group associated with this effort is ARPA funds, and therefore it doesn't have the general fund issue of only essentially being available through this biennium. So it could go into 2024. And so this is another one. I think maybe what I'll hear is talking about, prioritization as well. But let's go ahead and go to Jeff then.
Well, I mean, I really love contradicting myself in the same meeting. And so while the other one I was hyperventilating about, this one actually not so much. I think putting the department on a plan, especially knowing how you're going to fund the department in the future, is important. My question to you, Raquel, and maybe to you, Director Byler, is when we're looking at what fees should be triggered or what amounts they're in, does it take into consideration what your planning apparatus is to try to make the departments more efficient, to look at where the money is best and the most bang for the buck? Are you looking more expansively, or is that part of what the work group will do, saying that we're going to bring back X, Y, and Z type of funding mechanisms? Are you gonna? I'm just trying to figure the size and scope, right? That if we were creating the water resources department from the ground up now, how would it be funded? And you've heard me wax on a lot about this particular topic area over the period of years about the disinvestment in the water resources department and how we can't stand that. But we should use these ARPA dollars to kind of reset the department so it can be sustainable. So that was really my question. And so I wanted to acknowledge my inconsistency on this issue, but that's kind of, I just wanted to make sure I'm reading this one correctly.
Jeff, I think this is an opportunity for us to have a broad discussion around the long-term sustainability of programs and what role fees might play into that. I think it would be a mistake for us just to, given that we've kind of identified that the current model that we're using is not working very, very well. I think it would be a mistake for us just to have a conversation about whether we should increase those fees or not. I think we need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture and have a more thoughtful and creative discussion. So that would be my desire, is to use the work group setting to have that dialogue.
Marianne.
I mean, I think Jeff put it well and very nicely. I just have a fear with this that we put off the discussion that there's a lot going on, and then we end up with the department heading into a new budget season saying, oh my gosh, we need to raise revenue if we hit a recession in the next couple of years. Like there's a lot of peril in putting off this conversation. Though I 100% agree with April that I think we're all feeling very overwhelmed and that there's a lot on the plate. I guess I would want some assurance that if we put off this conversation, if we don't have time for a comprehensive conversation ahead of 23, that the department's not going to look to raise fees until we do. Because I have some concern that if we hit lean budget times, in the next several months, that or looking at, looking ahead, worried about leaner times, that we don't have the conversation and end up in a panic. Oh my gosh, we have to do something. And that has to be avoided. We've been putting this conversation off for a long time, and it has to happen, and it has to happen with enough space and time to get it right, before we ever have another fee increase conversation.
On that point, our hope is that, a couple things to bear in mind. One, because these are ARPA dollars, I think those ARPA dollars extend into 2024. Is that correct? Which, so it gives us a little bit of time. We need the legislature to make sure that our limitation to expend those dollars would move into next biennium. So from a funding standpoint, I think there's a longer runway for us. I also think that we're intending to use some of the ARPA dollars to help us, if we need it, with ending fund balances in our water right and fee-based programs. We're hoping and optimistic that that will be enough to cover us going into next biennium. And we'll be continuing to talk with internally around that conversation. If we start to see the signs that things are heading in a different direction, then we'll want to have a conversation with you all about what the implications of that might be in terms of our capacity going forward. But at this stage, I don't have any information that suggests that we would need to pursue a fee increase in 2023.
Tom, if I might add to that, you may recall our fee schedule for the Water Rights Services Division has been on a 4-year kind of track, right? And so 2021 was the last fee increase, and that fee increase was insufficient, which is what prompted this whole conversation, to actually cover our costs, which is where the ARPA funds has come into play to be able to essentially provide that support. And that included with us taking cuts. So I think what I'm hearing, Marianne, is that we need to have the conversation, because while we are looking at this we will need to have the conversation, at least theoretically, based on, the 4-year schedule for the 2025 session, which means we need to start having this conversation soon. So I think I'll leave it there.
April.
I did try and wait and make sure there weren't other hands that went up there. So I agree that there needs to be additional conversations about fees, and definitely in advance of there being additional fee increases. I think we all are feeling the pressure of the economic recession, or whatever you want to call it, the huge cost of everything. And I think it's important to be mindful that the folks that are growing our food and fiber, that we want to keep those folks in business, and particularly support small family farms, which of course is Marianne's members, but my folks serve those farmers and ranchers, and districts pay a share of those fees as well. So a couple things. One is again, in trying to bring people along with us that haven't necessarily been through these conversations, painfully so, that we, and I will speak for myself and the association, it's important that we have a functional water resources department. And, going back to previous comments about, making sure we can do things well. And I mean that as a state as well as individual entities, and making sure that the department has the resources, but also focusing in on those things that are most critical to its mission. We've often in the past engaged in these conversations where over the years, there's been multiple fee increases that have been passed upon my members and the farmers and ranchers they serve. And lately, it seems that those fee increases have been for imbalances in the calculations of things that we weren't aware of when we had negotiated previous fee increases, or DAS telling the department that they have to raise fees by 15% to cover the PERS burden. And these are things that have happened. I could be misstating those slightly, but I raise that because we have swallowed those fee increases that have been passed on to our folks and haven't had any of these conversations that need to be had about where do the models come from? If we've often said that for any given transaction, roughly 50% of that should be paid for by the water user or the applicant or the third party protestant or whoever it is, but roughly half should be paid by the person that is putting forth the application for that transaction. And the other half should be paid for out of general fund with the recognition that we all benefit from the wise management of water around the state. And I think that's something where we need to have a conversation. And this is something where I don't like the relating to clause, because that would seem to imply that there is potentially a new fee increase on the horizon, and that'll make my people freak out. But I do think that it's important that these conversations that frankly we were not able to have during the last session because of the virtual nature of things. I want to know more about what happened. Why was there this imbalance? Why were a whole bunch of people going to get laid off even though we increased fees? How do we make sure that the department is focusing in on its core mission with the dollars that it has? So I mentioned that because I don't think a study is necessarily what we're looking for here, but I do think a work group needs to happen. And I'm pleased to hear that potentially the ARPA funding will allow for that to go into the next biennium. But we need to have a conversation with the various water stakeholders before there's even a breath of discussion about increasing fees again. Thank you.
Thank you all. And just April, just to note, we are not intending to pursue this legislative concept as it's written, right? We don't want to do a study. We are intending to do the work group that was funded this past session. All right. Glenn, I don't see any more hands on this one, so maybe we should go to, I'd like to spend time on, yep.
All right. So I'm gonna unshare my screen. We're gonna hop over to split season leasing. And we're gonna spend a little more time on this because we have some policy suggestions on this, as well as some recommendations that we've received from you all that we need to discuss. So before we really dive into those policy discussions, I've asked Sarah Henderson here. Sarah, apologies. Sarah with an H. I misspelled your name on the agenda, so I appreciate you being here. She's going to give a brief overview, a really quick overview of what the program is and what it provides, just so we are all on the same page about what we're discussing. And then we'll go through some of the draft language and then some of the policy proposals that we've received, and we'll have a more broad, in-depth policy discussion on that. So Sarah, I know we have 5 minutes slated, but I would request that we move a little quicker just to work to get us a little farther through the agenda on this item, and we can quicken up this conversation. So without further ado, take it away, Sarah.
Right, I'll be really quick. My name is Sarah Henderson, Flow Restoration Program Coordinator, Water Resources. And so basically the in-stream lease process is a landowner leaving an existing water right in stream during a season or a year instead of using the right for existing water right purposes. The advantages of leasing a water right in stream is that it provides security from losing a water right for non-use, provides beneficial use of the water right. It allows for flexibility in changing water practices or uses, and allows the holder to provide environmental benefits to the stream. So the split season lease program was authorized in 2001 and had an original sunset date of 2008, was extended to 2014, and now it's 2024. The split season leases have the same criteria as the regular in-stream lease, but allows the water right to be used for both its original use and in-stream use in the same season or year. For example, seasonal uses such as irrigation may have one period for out-of-stream use and one period for in-stream use, like March to June for irrigating and July to October for in-stream. And then we have the full year uses such as municipal uses. They can have a single in-stream use period and two existing use periods. So January to March municipal use, April to August in stream, and then again September to December municipal as an example. The existing water use and the in-stream use shall not be concurrent. They cannot overlap the uses. The in-stream leases can be for 1 to 5 years. However, the footprint of the right included in a split season lease may only be leased for up to 10 consecutive years. The in-stream lease cannot result in injury of another water right or enlargement of an existing water right. The in-stream use and out-of-stream use must be within the limits of the originating water right. Let's see. The lands that are being leased in stream must be dried up. That's the from lands. This is to prevent enlargement of the water right. Typically, in-stream leases protect flows from the authorized point of diversion down to the mouth of the source stream, but the in-stream reach can be as short as a point. Landowners participating in the split season lease program are required to meter and report their water use to assure that the split season lease will not result in injury or enlargement. They need to consult with the water master in advance of submitting the in-stream lease to identify appropriate measuring devices and reporting requirements. Those have to be reflected in the in-stream lease application when it's submitted. The split season lease application needs to be submitted at least 2 weeks in advance of any water use beginning, whether in stream or out of stream. All changes unwind at the end of the term of the lease, so all the terms and conditions of the original water right are restored at the end. While the split season program is not heavily used, it has been a very important tool for several landowners and flow restoration groups for planning and restoration purposes. And since 2001, when the split season lease program started, the department's approved 57 split season leases, and 52 of those were submitted by restoration group. So that was super quick and I talked really fast. So if there's any questions.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate you being here. So I'm not seeing any hands going up, and I think maybe the best use of our time is just kind of move forward to give you all a quick overview of the really simple draft, excuse me, LC language, and then we'll jump over to the policy table that I sent out and we can have a more in-depth policy discussion. So I'm gonna share my screen on again. I apologize for the jumping back and forth. Essentially what you will see in the draft LC, it's really, really simple. We have essentially tried to address two different issues. The first issue is around the sunset date of the program. So I'm going to scroll down and you'll see section 2 of the draft LC essentially just repeals the laws that or the provisions that provide the sunset date for this program. So that's one piece that you'll find in the draft LC. The second piece in the draft LC is in section 1, and this piece repeals the 10-year cap for lands that can be leased. So as Sarah mentioned, there's a cap of 10 years for how many consecutive years a piece of land can be leased and released. So we're proposing to remove that 10-year cap to allow for folks to do that for a longer period of time. So those are the two items that we have included in the draft LC, just as really simple updates to the program that we think at minimum would be good to pursue. With that, I'm gonna hop over to the policy table, which provides kind of a more in-depth overview of our suggestions, and then also includes some suggestions from external folks that we have received, and then we have kind of put in front of all of you today. So I think how I would like to kind of structure this is I'm just going to go really quickly through our suggestions. I'll pause if anyone has anything that they'd like to add or concerns they'd like to voice on that line item in particular, and then we'll just move through the table as quickly as possible. So the first piece that we're going to chat about really quick is the program sunset. So that was already included in the draft LC language. So I'll just pause to see if any folks have any language they want to talk about or any comments they want to make on the program sunset date in particular. So I see Mary Ann's hand.
Yeah, and I still have some conversation to have with my members on this, but from the limited conversations I've had, I think I don't think we have a good enough sense of potential impacts of the program statewide, where it's been used, et cetera. I have a feeling that the most they'd be comfortable with is another, 4 years or 5, whatever an appropriate forward-looking time is, but not making the program permanent yet, because I don't know that they have a good enough sense for statewide implications, and especially, and I'll get to the other changes as we get to them, but especially if there's other changes coming that won't have been, part of the pilot.
Thanks, Mary Ann. I see Kaylin and James.
Thanks, Bren. Kaylin Barter, Wild Salmon Center. It's great to see Sarah on here. When I was working with Freshwater Trust, I got to work with Sarah really closely on using split season leases a lot, working with landowners to do these types of transactions. And I think it could be really useful. I don't know if it's possible to pull anything together in time for this call, but to understand, what the curve of transactions like this how that's looked over the last few years. I mean, I know initially it was very lightly used, and my sense is that in recent years, as more and more folks have become familiar with the program, we're actually seeing more and more lease applications come in. But I can't see that on my end. It just that was the trajectory that we were seeing previously. I can say that the sunset in our experience was actually leading landowners to not do split season leasing. I mean, they didn't want to go through the effort of trying to figure out, okay, if I try this, what am I going to have to change on my water management side? And that's a real shame. This program is one of the few voluntary stream flow restoration tools that we have as a state, and it meets the needs of landowners to be able to use their water right for one portion of the year and then leave it in stream for another portion of the year. I think looking at what are the actual harms that have resulted from this program versus what are the real and measurable gains that we've seen on the ground from more and more water users being able to become, kind of creative with how they're using their water rights. It paints a pretty powerful picture there. And I think, yeah, I'll hold my other comments for when we move further down into other provisions that we're looking at. Thanks, Bryn.
Thanks, Kaylin. James.
Hey, Bryn, James Fraser, Trout Unlimited. I wanted to just echo some of the things that Kaylin said there. We're really glad to see WRD prioritizing making this permanent program, but also the language about striking the 10-year cap, because ending that sunset, but also the 10-year cap gives landowners just some certainty about availability of this program, because as most folks can estimate, these relationships, but also the trust between the parties take a long time to build. And so giving water right holders the certainty that the program is going to be available, one, and then two, that they can make these leases last longer than 10 years. Number two, give certainty about whether those investments in time and relationship building are going to be worth it. So I'll hold any other further comments to later in this discussion about what's in that policy table, but just wanted to provide those for now.
Thanks, James. All right. I don't see any other hands or new hands. Oh, except for Mary Ann's.
Sorry, I thought I had unmuted. Bryn, I would just say, because I wasn't around for this program's creation, and would love more. This just feels like a kind of, no offense to the department, kind of a poor way to vet this for those of us that haven't been part of the conversation. I would love some dedicated time here with some of the folks like TU and Wild Salmon Center that have worked with the program, maybe with Sarah, who has worked with the program, to like actually do a deep dive, have some questions answered, better understand the math, all of the things, so we could maybe actually have a shot at working through this in advance of session. And I don't think that this process in the time frame that we have here is likely to get us there. So I would throw out another plea for another meeting. So I can better, because I wasn't around, and I'd like to just better understand this and better understand the math and work with those that have used the program to make sure that I'm taking the right stuff back to my folks.
So Bryn, oh, that bumped a bunch of folks up. One outcome we may want from this meeting is to determine who wants to be a part of a group to talk more in depth about this LC. I don't know if everybody on this call is interested in it or if it's a subset, because I do think, Marianne, we are starting the process here, and we haven't heard much. So this is our, the first time that we're hearing much back on this. And if there's a desire to have more detailed conversations, I think we're happy to set up that forum for that.
Thanks, Raquel. James, is that a new hand or is that an old hand?
Yeah, brief hand, new hand, just to say that I'd love to engage in those conversations and learn more. And I understand for time purposes, Sarah Henderson wasn't able to present more information today, but I would love to learn more about the in-stream leases and split season leases that have happened in the past. And if there are maps available about where all of those have been and party names, or, even takeaway narratives of how they went, that would be really helpful for me too. And I'd like to learn that alongside the Farm Bureau for sure.
Great. So I saw Kaylin, I think that's a new hand as well, Stan and Anton.
Yeah, thanks, Bryn. I think we haven't jumped ahead to the lease renewal cap, but I'll just put a pin in that. That is also a provision that we'd really support. I think, we've known that this split season lease sunset has been looming since the last time that this program got taken to remove the sunset. So I'm hopeful that we actually have a lot of the information already at our fingertips to be able to respond to some of the questions and concerns that are out there. As a practitioner that was working with this tool in the field, I think it could be really helpful to hear from some of the folks who have been doing these deals and who have chosen to renew year after year after year because they've found such utility in it. So happy to continue these conversations and definitely want to be a part of them. And also, I think, I do want to give this tool the attention that it deserves. I understand Sarah, again, moved really quickly through it, but I think one thing that is unique about these in-stream leases is how how easily they can be unwound if there's any kind of concerns around unintended consequences or enlargement. These leases have to go through the same, if not the same review process. And if there is any enlargement that's seen to occur, there's a very easy process for getting them unwound. So I really don't want to see the loss of any of these voluntary water restoration tools that we have in the toolbox, because things are only going to get harder as we move forward.
Thanks, Kaylin. Stan.
Yeah, my hand is mostly up because I would like to be part of a group if you do a deeper dive with a small group on that. I don't have a position on this right now, but I am kind of curious of what this means in terms of the potential for other uses to ultimately have access to conserved water. Because right now the existing water right holder and the in-stream uses are there, but if the existing water right holder doesn't need it in the long term, does this keep it from going to other potential users? That's the type of implication I'd like to see if it's out there.
All right. Noted. Stan, thank you. Anton.
Thank you. Anton Kiano with the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. We've worked with this tool, I think, really since its inception, and it's been tremendously valuable. We like to joke it's the have your cake and eat it too tool. Water right users can use the water when they need it, and then we can have the water protected in stream when the fisheries need it. So I think it's tremendously valuable. As Kaylin alluded, some of the uncertainty about its fate has made some of our water right holders a little bit nervous and less enthusiastic about engaging. I think we can take care of those concerns. So hopefully we'll be able to do a deeper dive, and would love to talk to some of the folks who have used and benefited from this tool, because I think it really maximizes the flexibility for water right users, and is terrific for the resource too. So if there's a smaller group, certainly count us as part of that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, it looks we got Kaylin and April next, and Karen.
I was just going to quickly respond to Stan's comment. Absolutely, for folks who are doing those conserved water projects, if they're not going to use the additional water that they have the right, to spread to new lands, it's a water right that they can transfer, just like any other water right that they would have. So, I think that there is a lot of flexibility that exists under that conserved water program. Note that these split season leases are only leases. I mean, these are temporary. They can last for a maximum of 5 years. So, these don't currently have the opportunity to be able to transfer, a portion of the water saved to another water use. But we'd be open to those conversations about, whether there's opportunities to do either conjunctive use where a portion of the water rights in stream and a portion of it's being used for fish reasons, or even exploring, having an additional period of use within the irrigation season. I mean, one of the things that we heard from water users was, hey, I'd love to be able to use my water right at the beginning of the season, put it in stream for even a few weeks to hit that key biological period, and then turn back on in the fall to get the fall green up. And under the current statute, we don't have that flexibility. So that could be another way to open up this statute to allow even more people to take advantage of this stream flow restoration tool.
Go ahead, April and Karen. And before April, sorry to cut you off. I think I'm looking at the time, and Raquel, I'll defer to your judgment on this. I think maybe what we should do is hold off on kind of going through the table. If it sounds like folks are interested in kind of taking this conversation offline and kind of discussing this more in depth as a smaller group. And then maybe we can kind of shift focus after April and Karen share their last thoughts to the broader discussion on LCs more general, and kind of giving folks an update on what we heard and where we're at with other stuff. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yes.
Cool. Okay.
The other items are going to require more detailed conversation. So I think, yes.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, April, sorry to cut you off.
Well, technically, I hadn't started talking, so you didn't really cut me off. A couple thoughts. One, just to be clear, our association has been supportive of extending the sunset on the split season lease program in the past. And I would encourage representatives who have an interest in broadening that conversation to reach out well in advance of a legislative concept being vetted so that we could have those informal conversations that I think are exceptionally important to doing anything beyond what is currently allowed. That being said, I think, beyond a sunset extension, there's additional issues that need to be discussed, and I'm empathetic to the concerns about folks using the program with a sunset on it. It's something that we've struggled with the district transfer pilot program, which thankfully was extended in 2021. But I mentioned that because we specifically had an informal agreement with other folks who are interested in that program on the opposite side, so to speak, that we would not be seeking to do anything more than just extend the sunset. Now, in that context, we were in a virtual session, but I also feel, given my comments earlier, that I would urge the proponents to be careful with what you push for, knowing that you can always introduce legislation outside of what the department introduces, but I wouldn't want to see the tools available in this program be put at risk by trying to expand the envelope further than what can be provided in the time we have. Now, all that being said, my suggestion would be that for each of the legislative concepts that we've talked about today, plus potentially the ones we didn't get to, that the department offer up small, not necessarily small by limited in who participates, but subject specific meetings for these topics, so that those that are really interested in talking more about stored water or split season or cannabis or whatever, can then go to that meeting and have an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper and learn more information. And I would suggest that that offer be sent to all the folks that were on this distribution list, so that nobody feels that they're being excluded from a conversation that they may care about. And then also recognizing that there are a lot of people who weren't able to join us today and will be watching this recording afterwards. Ooh, that sucks. So glad we were able to participate here together, but just recognizing that there are other folks that may want to be part of the conversation. And I think that would be helpful to have some more focused discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, April.
Bryn, Karen Lewatsky, I want to make sure we get to her before we move on.
Thanks. I'm going to pass and let us go ahead and catch up with what we've got to do, and I can share my comments later. But thanks.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Okay, so as I previously mentioned, I don't think it makes sense to go through the policy table, just given that we have lots of folks interested in kind of engaging in a more in-depth conversation. So we'll be following up after this meeting to try to get something on the books, and we can kind of have a more targeted conversation. So with that, I think I'm gonna steer us a little bit towards the broader LC conversation. We sent out a table, kind of an updated table from the worksheet that those of you who submitted feedback used. And I think my main thing I want to hit on are just an update on 2 of the agency proposals. I think either Tom or Raquel have another piece that they want to touch base on, and then we'll quickly kind of share some of the other suggestions that we received from folks as we started gathering and collecting feedback. So
I'm sorry, one last thing on the,
sorry about that, Caitlin.
Split season lease before we move on. It seems like there's some questions around the numbers of these leases that have been done. I mean, I'd be curious to know if there's any that have been unwound using the existing authority that the department has. And might we be able to ask the department for some kind of background information on that on a pretty short timeline to inform those next conversations? I mean, I'm envisioning like how many have been done, what years were they done, how long did they last? And maybe we can start to figure out like how many landowners and potentially how many CFS in areas are we at risk of losing at this point on it because of the sunset and the 10-year cap.
Yeah, I agree with Kaylin 100% on that. Sorry to
Kaylin, the short answer is
destroy
yes.
your argument, Kaylin. I'm sorry with me agreeing with you.
So the short answer is yes. It is always helpful if you want to, folks want to email any questions that they are hoping we can put information together on. That's always helpful, but Kaylin, you were already headed in the same direction.
Great. Thanks, Kaylin. Okay, great. So I'll draw everyone's attention to the potential LC topics worksheet that was sent out. I won't share my screen because I'm getting, I feel like I'm giving people motion sickness by jumping back and forth. So I'll just talk at you for a bit. So I'll just give an update on the planning LC that we're kicking around and thinking of. So I know we've chatted about it earlier, but the department's authority on place-based planning does sunset. So we are wanting to get something out the door on that with the acknowledgement that there are parallel discussions that are occurring with the regional water planning work group. And we understand that kind of given the other discussions around, folks are really strapped for resources and time. So we're going to do our best to kind of leverage those conversations and try to reduce the burden on everybody in terms of meetings and reading materials and all sorts of stuff. So I do want to flag that, you know, we are in the beginning phases of that LC. We will be submitting that as a placeholder. We're not anticipating having a fully baked LC by April 15th. So I just want to flag that for folks that there's going to be upcoming conversations and more outreach and engagement to come on that LC. So that's kind of why we're not spending too much time on that today. Additionally, I want to address the other line item that we had floated on enforcement in cannabis and kind of flag that is really dependent on 2022 outcomes. So we have decided to pull that concept off the table. So as Raquel and Tom both alluded to, we are currently hiring a lot of positions. We're training a lot of folks. We're implementing a variety of provisions with House Bill 4061. And we really feel right now that we need to kind of be in the building mode as we build our capacity and kind of work to get folks on board. From a legislative perspective, we don't think that we're going to really have the capacity to pursue any policy from the enforcement and cannabis perspective, since we're kind of working on getting beefed up in those areas of the department, and we need to kind of focus on building rather than continuing moving forward on that. So I saw a hand go up from Dylan on that piece. Or maybe the other pieces that I mentioned.
Thanks, Brent. It was actually related to the place-based planning piece. You know, I understand that it might not quite be done yet, but can you elaborate a little bit further on what you are anticipating as far as the next steps for building that out and how you're going to engage with folks on it?
Yeah, Dylan, thank you. So we have a community engagement plan that Raquel mentioned that we're working with the governor's office on and ensuring that we're doing extensive outreach and engagement. So we have a variety of internal recommendations. We were also waiting for the evaluation on place-based planning to come out to sort of help inform our next steps, just because it's really important that we build on work that's already been done as we work to kind of create provisions to kind of shore up the LC. So what we are hoping to do is draft up a piece of legislation that is at least something for you all to look at and respond to. And then hopefully, I don't know, we haven't really planned out if it is in a venue like an existing venue like this, or if we want to put another meeting on the calendar and kind of have a workshop sort of kind of focused conversations on place-based planning. That's kind of what we're thinking of with next steps, with the acknowledgement that, as I mentioned, there is other conversations going on with regional water planning work group, and then also engaging in conversations with our place-based planning groups whose planning work is kind of coming to an end and they're looking forward in terms of next steps for them. So we're also leaning on them to kind of inform, you know, what this LC looks like based on their lessons learned as well.
That's great. And I mean, we'll follow up in those venues, and glad that you're looking to the existing partnerships about recommendations on next steps and the evaluation. I would just make a plug as part of this as you're designing the LC and talking with folks to think about how we either incorporating within the LC or creating a plan within the agency to provide capacity to these groups for implementation of the plans. It is great to see them after 5-6 years of work here actually getting step 5 done. And, we want to definitely shift towards actually providing the resources to get it done, all for more planning to occur and thinking about where else we can do this work. But I think it's essential, especially with so many dollars being available at the state and federal level now, that we are providing them with the capacity and the expertise that they need to secure those dollars and implement. So my request would be to please make sure that we're providing some of that agency capacity, staffing, and resources to help support those groups to actually, put the dollars on the ground. Thanks.
Thanks, Don. All right. So with that, I think I'm going to turn things over to Raquel and Tom, I think, who wanted to provide an update on other potential ideas that are kind of newly emerging.
Thanks, Bryn. I'll weigh in. One topic that is kind of recently emerging that I want to put on people's radar screens is the Confederated Tribes, the Umatilla Indian Reservation, have been interested in pursuing their federal reserve water right claims in the Umatilla Basin for some time now. Between the state and the tribes, there's been confusion about whether the tribes had access to our ORS Chapter 539 water right settlement process that provides the kind of the clear public process under the state of Oregon statutes for that formal public notice and process that would include submitting the terms of an agreed to settlement to the circuit court. And so what we're contemplating is in working with the tribes is a bill that would add clarity to Chapter 539 to allow the Umatilla tribes to pursue that process and to access that public process. So we don't have any language at this time, but we wanted to put this on everyone's radar screen. This may be a concept that we'll be offering up as part of the other ones that we've already talked about. And we can report out on this at future meetings of this group as well.
Great. I don't see any hands going up. So that's good for facilitation purposes. We are gonna move, thank you for that, Tom. We're gonna move into the bottom half of that worksheet, basically summarizing the other suggestions. So these are ideas that were recommended to the department through your guys' feedback that you gave us. So I'll just kind of zip through those quickly and pause after each for folks to kind of share comments, concerns, support, whatever your initial gut reaction is on those. And then with the remainder of time, I think we've got 20 minutes left. That's probably all we'll have time to do. We'll postpone those budget pop conversations until our next meeting with the intent that folks that have not yet been able to provide feedback, please provide your comments either in writing or reach out to me for a verbal meeting as soon as possible. So with that, I'll just go ahead. Oh, I see Marianne's hand.
Yeah, just before we move too far beyond the issue flagged on the Umatilla, Director Ballard, I assume you're having some conversations with the local water user groups there, like NAWA and others, or will be.
The tribes have been reaching out to a number of water interests to date, but there'll be a much more extensive outreach that will be occurring as we move down the path.
Okay.
So Bryn, just before we get too far along on these other LCs, I want to note that our concerns around capacity in terms of it taking on additional proposals, those still exist. And so I think that is something that I would just note for folks as we're talking about whether to add any additional concepts. We have concerns about doing that from a capacity standpoint. So Bryn, why don't you go ahead?
Great. Thanks, Raquel. Yeah, so I'm sharing my screen again. So these are the water measurement, surface groundwater, and water right property ownership were the 3 suggestions that we received. So I'll just start at the top and we'll work our way down. So the first suggestion we received was on water measurement reporting authority. So this is essentially the suggestion that we should continue with efforts to procure reporting authorities as a tool. So for water management. So I don't think this is a new concept to many of you. So that was one suggestion. I will pause there to see if folks have any comments or initial thoughts on that suggestion. Marianne.
I mean, I'm down to continue that conversation. I think we should pick up where we left off in the last work group. I think it's going to take more work group conversation. I don't think there was a full meeting of both sides on the right approach and the right resourcing for the approach. And I know that the department's already looking at you know, a number of places to invest. It's for the cost share measurement work already. But you know, I guess my flag there would be, if we're going to do it, it has to be done right. And we've got a lot of things on the plate and we're going to have to prioritize. And so I'm down for that one, as long as it picks up where we left off. And as long as it's, you know, done collaboratively with Rep Owens and Rep Helm, and the, you know, the picking up where the conversation left off.
Great. Okay, so it looks like we got Peggy and then Caitlin.
All right. So without getting into the work group issue and whatever, I just want to put on the table that data is just critical. As we go into this extreme drought situation this summer again, somehow or another, the agency needs to focus on making sure they have the data to be able to do the work, the regulation that they need to do. And so again, without getting into the details of this LC, I just want to put on the table that your place-based planning groups and almost anyone who wants to talk about water says we need to have accurate data in order to have to make reasonable and fair policy decisions. So I just, without the details, I just want to make sure that data is somewhere in this discussion as we work forward.
Thanks, Peggy. Caitlin, and then Marianne, is that a new hand? Okay.
I'll start off and say amen, Peggy. Definitely need more data on where water's getting used, where it's starting. So I really hope that, back to our earlier conversation around using all the tools at our disposal, that the department will prioritize whatever investments are needed to make OpenET continue to be a tool that we can use to estimate water use, and also to look at measuring actual diversions for significant diversions. I'll also just respond and say, yes, the work group covered a lot of ground. And I can also say that it really ended right where it started, with us having a better understanding of where the different sides were, but very little progress on a solution in that forum. So I'll push back and say, I do not want to pick up where we left off, because that was a significant amount of time and resources for all of the groups involved in that to not significantly move the ball forward.
Right, Marianne, and then Kristen.
Sorry, and I'll be quick. I just want to respond a little on the data point. I agree that we need to focus on getting data that we need to make good decisions. I'm just not convinced that measurement and reporting data. And for me, that was one of the takeaways I had from the work group. I'm not saying anybody else did, but was that our technology is kind of surpass the utility of putting the burden on water users to I think measurement is valuable for in-time regulation, but unless your reporting is going to be 100% lifetime, which my members will never get behind, and I think is cost prohibitive for a lot of people, our better tools are going to be things like ET and other places that we have data and information available for water management. And so to me, this feels like some extent resurrecting a fight that's the technology's moved past. And so if people want to do it, I am down for for having the conversation. I think I have a funnier view of Kaylin of progress that was made and movement that was made. But I'm not convinced. To me, this feels a little like something that's being held on to because it was a conversation that was important a decade ago and a win that somebody wants, but not. I don't know that it actually moves the data and water management ball forward in a meaningful way, especially when, we've had a lot of groups, mine included, that supported House Bill 2018 and investment in an open ET. And so I feel like there's a narrative out there that water user groups fight data and the conservation groups promote data. And I just want to say, I don't think that's accurate. I think we have supported data collection and data use for water management where it's actually moving the ball forward and actually resulting in more information. I don't think that anybody's ever met the burden of convincing us that reporting is doing either of those things or is a necessary tool in 2022 with the amount of kind of precise other methods of data collection, including open ET. But other kinds of this satellite imaging that's happening, some of the irrigation systems that people are investing in for their own water management use, that again, I don't think, I've never been convinced that lifetime reporting that to the state is a benefit for the state. And so I just I think it's a fine conversation to have. I think we made a lot of progress in 2021. I question with everything else we have going on if this is the best use of time, but if others think it is, that's fine. But I'm going to push back a little bit on the narrative that this tool is the important tool.
Thanks, Marianne. So looks like we have Kristen, then April, and then Peggy.
Well, I would say ditto to Kaylin's comment and others before. I don't think there's anything more, or there's really almost nothing more important than having accurate information about water use, demand, and in-stream flows. I don't know how we can, manage resources as a state and meet our objectives under the Integrated Water Resources Strategy, our objectives across all of the natural resource agencies without that fundamental information. OpenET is a great tool, but it also is limited in the amount of time it takes for processing and the scope of what's been funded so far. So I really, just support the department having access and availability to all of the tools that they need to be able to do their jobs effectively and understand, the resources going forward. The ditto to Kaylin's comment is just, I also felt like there was a huge resource allocation from stakeholders in the work group. And we did spend a lot of time understanding perspectives and challenges, but I didn't feel that the process moved us to where we were very close to a solution. And so I think putting some thought into how to get through a process that really leads to an outcome that has the broad support we need would be very helpful. So it would be good to maybe reframe the structure of that to make sure that, we have something to show for all of our time investment at the end of the process. And for the agency as well. So thank you for having this on the list.
All right, April and then Peggy.
Okay, so I have a few thoughts. Consistent with previous remarks, I think we could restart the conversation as we did before on water measurement reporting. And if that was the only thing we had to work on, we may be able to make some progress there. But few things. One, and again, trying to bring other folks along with us. This issue has been talked about for several sessions, and I do feel like last time around there was actually a workable proposal, and it wasn't ag that killed it, just to be clear. But I do think that for bringing folks along, the Water Resources Department, although they can correct me if I say this incorrectly, has all the authority to require folks to measure, but they do not apparently have the authority to require the reports from folks who are already measuring, let alone those who may be measuring in the future. And that's something that seems pretty silly, right? But there are a lot of questions, including from the folks who have a lot to lose, in that they are concerned that information that I agree with the conservation folks that data and information is extremely important, but it's also how it's used, and making sure that that quest for additional information does not lead to folks losing their water rights and further endangering small farms and ranches. However, because I am not opposed to having additional conversations, and I think it's also important to note that my members' districts are already required to not only measure but report. And so we want to ensure that as we look to increase the data, that it's not putting an undue burden upon my members or anybody else for that matter. But one of the other core pieces of this conversation that I think has been lost every single time in recent memory that we've talked about it, and I would encourage all of us to take a different approach, which is, we're going to have additional conversations about policy and potentially increasing those who report or those who measure or any of that. Let's put that over here in one conversation, because it's extremely sensitive and there are still feelings about how the previous processes have went. But on the same token, and there are a number of concepts on this list that Brendan didn't have a chance to talk with us today that I know we're going to talk about further, is how do we use, and the we being the state, how do we use the data we have, let alone where would that additional data go? Would it go into, I'm sorry guys, a useless database that doesn't do anything for anybody other than looking for gotchas and ways that you can sue people? Or do we actually focus on having a workable database and supporting the Water Resources Department so that they have not only the people, but the software and the servers and all those other things, to where as we get more information, which is essential and is needed around the state, that is in a user-friendly and accessible way that actually helps all of us better manage our water. And so again, I'm not opposed to having additional conversations, and as we go through additional priority setting, we can all weigh in on that. But I would also encourage all of us to be focused on how can we get the resources to be able to make that data that we have more usable and pave the way for how we can make future data also that same level of accessible and all that good stuff. So thank you.
All right, Peggy and Oriana.
So, Marianne, you missed my point. I was not necessarily saying this particular LC, but what I was focusing on was the need for data. And thank you, April, for your comments. I do believe we need to make sure that we have a user-friendly IT system to be able to make sure that the data we have and any data we get in the future can be used by all to make good policy decisions. And that was my point. I'm not going to get in the middle of whether or not we need to have this measurement or that measurement, but we just need to figure out how to address the need for data to make good policy decisions. We will be having a discussion about the next LC about surface and groundwater, and we all know the crisis we're in with groundwater in many parts of the state. We need to figure out how to discuss and how to keep and how to provide the data for policymakers, decision makers on water. Thank you.
Oriana, and then I saw Raquel's hand go up.
Raquel, do you want to jump in front of me if you're responding to something that's been directly said? Or so I think if we're having this conversation around data here, and in particular in using data in ways that are beneficial for communities and not just necessarily punitive, I think there has to be some discussion around this LC in terms of how this data interacts with data and work in other agencies as well. Thinking about the way like OpenET has been used in Arizona related to recent wildfires, and just some of the impact on forest health and forest management on the hydrological cycle. Similarly, thinking about the ways in which some of the incentives that come up from like Energy Trust of Oregon around irrigation modernization can come into play. Like, I think that the big concern I'm hearing here, at least from the work that we do with communities, is making sure that this data, like April was saying, doesn't just go sit somewhere, but actually can be used in ways that are beneficial, and that the purpose and value of data for communities can be well understood as a way to connect to resources, to better understand resilience for communities in different ways. And so if this moves forward, I think making sure that the table that discusses this LC expands to include other agencies like ODF, potentially Department of Energy, and not in a way to increase regulation or opportunity, but simply to make sure that this data is talking to other data sets and in a way that's really clear and accessible is really important.
Thanks, Ariana. Go ahead, Raquel.
Yeah, so we're about at time here, and I appreciate the robust discussion on data and water measurement. The next two LCs, I think, so the first one is surface water and groundwater regulation. You all may be familiar with a recent court decision related to our regulation of groundwater and surface water in the Klamath Basin. And essentially, the court said the process for that is through a critical groundwater area. So it's not that the agency doesn't have authority for it, but the court essentially said that we should be doing it through a particular process. The other proposal that we heard is related to property ownership and the department receiving notifications of changes in property. This proposal, we used to have authority for folks to be required essentially to provide us with an update when their property ownership changes. The department actually, that authority was repealed a while back as a streamlining measure, in part because of us getting that information through different mechanisms, primarily through county tax records, I think it is, Bryn, or property records. So I want to, I think, close out with just, I don't know that given our timing and given how much you're hearing all the other work the agency has, I'm not sure that we are looking to add those LCs to our list. And I would encourage folks, if you want to discuss either one of those, since we are out of time, and discuss why you think we should run any one of these LCs this session, I would encourage you to reach out to us. But I'm hesitant to add additional topics onto our list, just given the workloads that we have talked about, and the fact that some of those other issues that we are directed by the legislature to pursue are going to be big topics for us. We all know transfers of stored water issues are a big topic, and we also know that the discussion around fees is a big topic. So I just want to put that out there so folks can expect, I think, the direction the agency is going with these. However, if you all, if folks want to talk more about any one of those ones that were suggested, feel free to reach out. So with that, Bryn, I think given that we're at time, we've got some to-dos and we'll have some additional meetings to set up. I really appreciate the engagement here today. I always find it very helpful to hear from all of you. your perspectives and the diversity of perspectives. I think it helps us make better policy. I think it helps us request, do a better job with our budget requests. And so I really appreciate the engagement here. I know 3 hours of your time is a lot of time, and these are important issues. So once again, thank you, and we will be in touch. So any other final comments before we wrap this up?
Thank you all.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
We'll get
everyone.
this recording posted to the internet if you want to relive it, or for those of you who are able to attend for the entire meeting. So we'll go ahead and get this posted. So, so everyone can see what we talked about. All right. So with that, thank you, everyone. We will be following up offline to get some meetings set and see who else has interest in participating in further conversations on more specific subtopics. So with that, thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Brim.